Chapter 1773. Outside the battle hall, there were people passing by from time to time. They looked like they were passing by casually, but they had other motives. It's almost a year. That guy should be coming out soon. That's right. One more day and it will be a full year. Unless he's willing to pay the silver heart again to continue cultivating. I think the reason why he set a 1-year time limit is to match the spirit boosting pill. There are only 12 spirit boosting pills, and each pill lasts for a month. That's a total of 1 year. Tomorrow is the day he comes out. Watch him closely. In the blink of an eye, a day had passed. It wasn't until the evening that Chu Mu's figure appeared. He's out. Report it immediately. The seemingly nonchalant people outside the war hall quickly took action and spread the news. Just nice. Middle 6th heavenly layer. Chu Mu said as he felt the divine desolate sword essence flowing in his body. Yes, in 1 year, with 18 times the cultivation speed, Chu Mu had been cultivating in the outside world for 18 years. If he had been in the deep blue world for 18 years, with Chu Mu's dantian, which was different from other cultivators, it would have been impossible for him to raise a single level. However, the exiled land's natural energy was much denser than most places in the deep blue world. Therefore, his cultivation speed was much faster. Therefore, under the 18 times cultivation speed in the land of exile, Chu Mu's cultivation had not only broken through from the early 5th heavenly layer to the middle 6th heavenly layer. The 12 spiritual boosting pills were used up, but the dragon-devouring jade was still effective. It continued to absorb the yuan qi of heaven and earth into Chu Mu's body. It was constantly being refined and converted into divine desolate sword essence. Chu Mu's cultivation base was slowly increasing. I wonder how strong I can be at the middle 6th heavenly layer? Chu Mu thought to himself. Suddenly, he had an idea. He wanted to find an expert to test his strength and see how strong he was. Of course, this expert would have to be at least a 9-star Saint Realm beginner. Chu Mu was certain that he had the strength to fight against an ordinary 9-star saint, but he wasn't sure if he could fight against an intermediate 9-star saint. Young master. The little maid, Lin Biruo, had also finished her cultivation and walked out of the black iron cultivation room. The moment she saw Chu Mu, she quickly ran over to him. The multiplier in the iron-level cultivation room was 9 times. However, Lin Biruo's divine body was only at the early stage of level 3 and was not strong enough. Therefore, she could not withstand the impact of the qi of heaven and earth and sword essence all the time. Therefore, after a period of cultivation, she would stop and let her meridians rest. During this time, she would practice the azure water sky sword technique. Even so, 1 year of cultivation was equivalent to several years of cultivation in the outside world. Lin Biruo's original cultivation level was at the peak of the middle 5th heavenly layer. However, with her talent, it wasn't easy for her to break through to the late 5th heavenly layer. It would take several years. Now, because she had entered the iron-level cultivation room, she had successfully broken through and consolidated her late-stage 5th sky of Aeon cultivation. She had saved at least a year's time to reach the peak of the 5th sky of Aeon. Not bad. Let's go. Chu Mu nodded and left the battle hall with Biruo. You are welcome to come again, the deacon said as he sent Chu Mu and Lin Biruo out of the battle hall. Of course, he would welcome such a big customer. The more he came, the more he would earn. He would be a fool if he didn't. I will come again if I have the chance. At that time, it will be cheaper. Chu Mu smiled and walked out of the battle hall without looking back. Lin Biruo and Lin Biruo went straight to Long Yunkong's manor. That was where Chu Mu was staying. After returning, Chu Mu impatiently pulled out his sword and began practicing his sword technique. For a whole year, Chu Mu had been practicing the Divine Baron's sword origin non-stop. He felt that he was about to forget the feeling of practicing the sword. Of course, he wouldn't forget. Even if he didn't practice the sword for 100 years, he wouldn't forget. practicing the sword had long been imprinted in his bones. It had become his instinct. However, practicing the sword was a habit. If he didn't practice for a period of time, he would feel uncomfortable. Sword light lit up the courtyard when he drew his sword. What Chu Mu cultivated was the foundation sword technique. This was the main point of his cultivation. As for the other sword techniques, they all started from the low rank to the high rank, and then to the higher rank. Switching back and forth, ultimately, the foundation sword technique remained the same throughout the ages. The basic sword technique was the foundation of the sword technique. It was the most important and had been passed down for a long time. Seeing Chu Mu practicing the sword technique, Lin Biruo didn't stay idle. She also drew her sword and practiced the sword technique. He stayed there for another month. Every day, Chu Mu would practice the sword and comprehend. Because of the dragon swallowing jade, he didn't need to actively practice the Divine Baron's sword origin. This guy, he actually didn't leave Bloodbath City. The group of 8 star saints who were waiting for Chu Mu to leave Bloodbath City had been paying attention to Chu Mu's movements. When they saw that he didn't seem to have any intention of leaving the manor, they were a little anxious. Although to them, 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years wasn't much, they had their own things to do. They couldn't just wait here for Chu Mu to leave Bloodslaughter City, right? Moreover, a few years really wasn't much. However, what if Chu Mu stayed for 10 years, or even a few decades? We have to think of a way to force Chu Mu out of Bloodbath City. Force? How do you want to force him? Do you want to make a move? When Chu Mu was still in the war hall, these people didn't think too much about it. Now that Chu Mu had come out and didn't seem to have any intention of leaving Bloodbath City, they had no choice but to think of a way. They had to solve it as soon as possible. Moreover, the stronger Chu Mu was, the more disadvantageous it would be for them. Right now, he was only at the mid-stage of the 6th sky of the Wangu realm. They believed that he wasn't their opponent. In the past few years, Chu Mu's reputation had spread far and wide. However, there were many people who didn't think that he was that strong. In their hearts, the most talented people in the younger generation were from the 6 great stars. At best, Chu Mu was a genius on the same level as them. In other words, Chu Mu was only at the mid-stage of the 6th sky of the Wangu realm, but he could fight against mid-stage 8-star true saints. However, if he was given enough time to break through to the 7th sky of the Wangu realm, they wouldn't be able to fight against him. At that time, they would have to run as far as they could. Otherwise, they would die. In fact, there were 4 people in the Waning Moon Sword Saints group. All of them were at the peak of the 8-star True Saint realm. Ingwei's group had 4 people. One of them was a high-level 8-star True Saint realm, while the other 3 were mid-stage 8-star True Saint. They were Lin Ziki and Fei Yang's guards. Both of them had their eyes on Chu Mu. The interesting thing was that neither side knew the other's goal. Otherwise, they would be on guard against each other. Brother Ingwei, I have an idea. One of Fei Yang's guards rolled his eyes and said in a low voice. What idea? Geek. Ingwei frowned and said. The other 2 mid-stage 8-star True Saints stared at the guard, waiting to see what he would say. Doesn't Chu Mu have a maid? The guard chuckled. Maid? What's the use of that? Hee, I've already investigated. That maid is called Lin Biru. She's from a small family called the Lin family. She used to be in charge of the Lin family, but because Chu Mu killed the Eagle Bear duo, she was willing to become Chu Mu's maid to avenge the Lin family. I can see that Chu Mu cares about this maid a lot. You mean? Ingwei's furrowed brows immediately relaxed. That's right. What I mean is, we can use the small Lin family to lure Lin Biru out. Then, we can capture her and bring her out of Bloodbath City. Then, we can send a message to Chu Mu and lure him out of Bloodbath City. What if Chu Mu doesn't fall for it? Yeah, he might know that this is a plot against him. He can just ignore it. Anyway, it's just a try. It's just a small family. Even if we destroy it, it doesn't matter. If we fail, we can think of other ways. If we succeed, we don't have to wait. Okay, let's do that. Ingwei finally made his decision. I'll leave this matter to you. Don't let Chu Mu find out about it. Don't worry, I'll do it well. A plot against Chu Mu was completed with such a simple plan. All that was left was to carry it out. A small family like the Lin family would not be able to resist them at all. Young master, I want to go back to my family, Lin Biruo said to Chu Mu. Okay. Chu Mu nodded. Although she was his maid, Chu Mu would not restrict Biruo's freedom. Moreover, it had been more than a year. It was normal for Biruo to want to go back. After all, she used to be in charge of the family and had feelings for it. Not long after Lin Biruo left, Chu Mu suddenly had a strange feeling. It was not very comfortable. Good. I didn't expect you to come out on your own before I even started. This 8-star mid-level saint-level expert was overjoyed when he saw Lin Biruo, who was one step ahead of him. His original plan was to force the Lin family to summon Lin Biruo back, then capture her. After all, although fighting was prohibited in Bloodbath City, his strength was far superior to Lin Biruo's. If he wanted to capture her, it would only take an instant, and it wouldn't attract the attention of the Bloodbath Sword Guard. When Lin Biruo entered the Lin family, this 8-star mid-level saint-level expert also entered the Lin family. He immediately made his move and captured Lin Biruo. Success! This 8-star mid-level saint-level expert was very happy to capture her so easily. Next, I'll make some arrangements and send the news to Chu Mu. Soon, Ingwei and the other 3 quickly left Bloodbath City and headed out of the city. Since fighting was prohibited in the city, they could only lure Chu Mu out of the city and kill him. Chapter 1774. There was an endless stream of people coming and going in the huge Bloodbath City. A figure shuttled through the crowd like a ghost, like a fish swimming against the current. His speed was extremely fast, and he seemed incomparably agile. Every time someone seemed to be moving in front of him, he would have already passed by, leaving behind a blurry back view. Chu Mu's expression was calm, and not a trace of emotion could be seen. His eyes were apathetic, as cold as ancient cold steel. With each step he took, he could often cross several meters. His figure shuttled through the crowd with extreme agility. Wherever he passed, the surrounding people seemed to feel a chill as he brushed past them. His expression was calm and indifferent, but the more furious he was, the more his killing intent burned. Not long ago, someone brought him a piece of news. His little maid Lin Biruo had been captured. If he wanted her to live, he had to rush to the pine forest 10 li north of Bloodbath City within 6 hours. Otherwise, he would only be able to collect her corpse. It was just a piece of news, and there was no mention of who it was. But that wasn't important. What was important was that they dared to capture Lin Biruo to threaten him. Chu Mu wasn't stupid. He knew that the other party's target was him. They wanted to lure him out of Bloodbath City before taking action. Then, those people could be the ones who had bid against him at the auction. His cultivation base had reached the middle 6th sky of the Wangu realm, and his strength had increased significantly. Chu Mu wanted to test how strong he had become. Will he come? Yeah, she's just a maid. Can she lure him out? It doesn't matter. If he doesn't come out, we'll just kill him. The guard glanced at the unconscious Lin Biruo and said casually. If Chu Mu didn't come, Lin Biruo would be killed by them. Then, they would think of other ways to lure Chu Mu out of Bloodbath City. 4 hours have passed. If he can't make it in 2 more hours, 6 hours from the manor to here. Even with his cultivation base at the 7th sky of the Wangu realm, it's still a bit difficult. If he really wants to make it here, he will definitely use up most of his energy. This was also part of their plan. They estimated Chu Mu's strength to be comparable to 6 stars. Therefore, a mid-stage 6th sky of the Aeon realm was equivalent to a mid-level 8-star saint. Furthermore, geniuses could fight across levels. Their strength was stronger than their cultivation, but cultivation was always a limitation. A 6th level Aeon Genius might not be any weaker than an 8th level Aeon Genius, but their sword energy was definitely not as much as an 8th level Aeon Genius. It had to be said that in order to kill Chu Mu, they had done their homework. First, they would greatly exhaust Chu Mu's strength before killing him to avoid any accidents. There was no room for error in the plan. Otherwise, if such a monster escaped and went into hiding to raise his cultivation and strength, the revenge he would exact upon them in the future would be unbearable. 4 hours passed. A figure appeared in their line of sight. "Ha, he's here." They actually came. Aren't they too stupid? Hee, maybe they're very confident in their own strength. Chu Mu's speed was extremely fast. With a single step, he was more than 10 meters away. He saw the 4 guards and the unconscious Lin Biruo. She hadn't been killed yet. Chu Mu was slightly relieved. Then, his indifferent eyes swept across the 4 guards' faces. For some reason, they felt a chill run down their spines. 5 hours. You're an hour earlier than the time we set. It seems like you really care about this, maid. Ing Wei sneered. I wonder how much sword energy you have left. Chu Mu's expression didn't change at all. In fact, Chu Mu didn't use much energy to rush here from the manor in Bloodbath City. This was because he could use the vibration of his muscles to instantly burst out with power. Especially after mastering the energy unification technique to perfection, he could use the most energy-conserving method to achieve the greatest effect. Therefore, when they saw Chu Mu walk a dozen meters in one step, it seemed as if he had used up a lot of energy. In reality, this wasn't the case. Moreover, his own energy recovery speed wasn't slow either. Therefore, after 5 hours of rushing here, he had only used up a small portion of his energy. Moreover, he was rapidly recovering. This was something Ing Wei and the others didn't know. Otherwise, they would have to replan. However, they didn't have the chance to do so. Lin Ziki, who else? Chu Mu's voice was indifferent, like a cold wind blowing past. Go to hell with your questions. The camp guard coldly laughed, and his killing intent was awe-inspiring. The 4 of them flashed and formed a square encirclement, surrounding Chu Mu and pointing their swords at him. Attack! 4 sharp sword light tore through the sky like lightning and thunder. The sword light was blazing with killing intent, attacking Chu Mu from all directions. Any 8-star Saint Realm expert would be injured if they were to face such an attack. Unfortunately, Chu Mu's current strength was no longer limited to the 8-star Saint level. The 4 sword light, no matter how sharp and powerful, did not escape Chu Mu's perception. The trajectory of the 4 sword light was completely captured by Chu Mu. He clenched his right hand. Spiritual flames jumped and spread out, turning into a sword. With the blazing glory spiritual sword in hand, his killing intent suddenly gushed out like a volcanic eruption. The terrifying killing intent invaded the surroundings, enveloping the 4 people. A chill rose from the depths of their bodies. The energy unification spiritual sword was swung out. It was a silent sword. A wisp of red sword chi streaked across the sky in an arc. There was no beginning and no end, as if it was a line connecting the sky and the water. This was the last scenery that Ing Wei and the others saw in this world. It was as if they were sitting on top of a mountain facing the sea when the sun was setting in the west, looking at the line where the sea met the sky in the distance and the red glow of the sunset. How can the sword be so fast? A question appeared in Ing Wei's mind. He felt the strength in his body was rapidly draining away. Darkness fell in front of him. He regretted that he had provoked Chu Mu. It turned out that his real strength was far above his, and he was not an 8-star saint. However, it was too late for regret. 1 sword. It was just 1 sword. He did not use any sword moves. It was just a basic sword technique. That sword stroke contained several basic sword moves: the eternal sword intent, the true sword intent, the true slashing intent, and the energy unification technique. Even a peak 8-star saint rank would find it hard to block Chu Mu's sword, let alone an 8-star saint high stage or middle stage. After the sword stroke, the red sword chi disappeared. 3 corpses fell to the ground. There was a thin red mark on each of their necks. The eternal sword intent, the true sword intent, and the true sword intent had destroyed the consciousness of the other party. There was still one person alive. It wasn't because Chu Mu couldn't kill him, but because he had stayed behind to interrogate him. Other than Lin Ziki, who else is there? Chu Mu turned around and looked at the person indifferently. I won't say anything even if I die. The 8-star saint gritted his teeth and said. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. Too terrifying. Chu Mu was too terrifying. He was only at the mid-stage of the 6th sky of the Wangu realm, but he could kill an 8-star saint and 2 8-star saints in one strike. The reason he didn't die was probably because Chu Mu wanted to interrogate him. Even the 6-star kings didn't possess such strength when they were still at the mid-stage of the 6th sky of the Wangu realm. He knew that he had provoked the wrong person this time. No matter what, he couldn't reveal his young master's name. Otherwise, he would provoke a terrifying enemy. This kind of monstrous genius was even more terrifying than the 6-star kings. If he couldn't kill him, he would be the target of revenge. Then die. Chu Mu said. With a flick of his wrist, the blazing brilliance spiritual sword pierced through the other party's forehead and destroyed his consciousness. The 8-star saint didn't expect Chu Mu to be so decisive. Originally, he wanted to stall for time with Chu Mu. After all, no one wanted to die like this. Unfortunately, when they captured Lin Biruo to threaten him, Chu Mu had already decided to kill them. With a flash of sword light, Huang Xiaolong sliced open their heads and retrieved their primordial spirit. They were primordial spirits that had reached the mid-stage and late stage of the Wangu realm. Then, their interspatial rings became Chu Mu's spoils of war. You've been watching for so long. It's time for you to come out, Chu Mu said indifferently as he looked around and locked his gaze in front of him. However, he seemed to be talking to the air and didn't get any response. Chu Mu didn't say anything else. His eyes became sharp like a sword. He raised his hand and slashed his sword upward. The sky seemed to split open. A white sword chi shot out from the void and slashed down. Heaven's scar-killing sword move. One of the people hiding in the pine forest was targeted. He couldn't dodge and could only take the attack head-on. However, although the heavenly scar-killing sword style was the weakest of Chu Mu's sword styles, it wasn't that easy to block. The white sword chi slashed down. A scream was heard. One person was killed. Stop! We don't mean any harm. The remaining people couldn't stay calm anymore. They couldn't continue hiding. They could only show themselves and shout loudly. If they didn't show themselves and make a sound, they might be attacked again and killed like that person. These people were the Waning Moon Sword Saint and the others. Originally, when they noticed Ying Wei and the others' movements, they planned to be the oriole behind the mantis stalking the cicada. Therefore, they hid in the pine forest and hid their traces and auras. They planned to wait for Ying Wei and the others to kill Chu Mu. Then, they would kill Ying Wei and the others and intercept them. Unexpectedly, the result was completely out of their expectations. Ying Wei and the others didn't kill Chu Mu as they wished. Instead, they were killed by Chu Mu with one strike. What did it mean to be killed with one strike? Ying Wei was an 8-star saint at the high level, and the other 3 were 8-star saint at the middle level. Even the Waning Moon Sword Saint would have to spend some time to kill them. Didn't it mean that Chu Mu, who they thought of as their target, was stronger than them? Chapter 1775. In front of Chu Mu were the Waning Moon Sword Saint and the other 2 peak 8-star martial saints. However, at this moment, they did not have the demeanor of an expert. Their faces were pale and their hearts were palpitating. Wrong, they had made a mistake in their judgment. This mid-level 6-star martial saint was not prey at all. He was a powerful hunter. He had killed 2 mid-level 8-star martial saints and 1 high-level 8-star martial saint with a single strike. He had also injured the other mid-level 8-star martial saint. If he wanted to, he could even kill them. Then, he had killed a peak 8-star martial saint with a single strike. Such strength was definitely not at the level of an 8-star martial saint. He was at the level of a 9-star martial saint. With such strength, it would not be difficult for him to kill them. "Sir, we mean no harm." To the left of the waning moon sword saint was the rock sword saint. He hurriedly said in a very sincere tone, "Yes, sir, we mean no harm." The waning moon sword saint and the third peak 8-star martial saint said the same. As for the fourth one, he had already died under Chu Mu's heavenly scar sword style. "Would you believe your own words?" Chu Mu asked as he withdrew his spiritual power from Lin Biruo's body. She had only fainted because her sword origin was sealed. There were no other injuries. "Sir, our purpose is only to kill those 4 people." The waning moon sword saint's voice was somewhat feminine as he smiled bitterly. With the waning moon sword saint's words, Chu Mu immediately understood. Their goal was to wait for the 4 camp guards to kill him before killing the 4 camp guards and being the fisherman. However, so what? Since they had appeared here, it meant that they did not have good intentions. "Sir, we are willing to pay a sufficient price," the rock sword saint said. The other party was too strong. They were not people they could fight against. Since that was the case, it would be too stupid to go against them. They planned to use some treasures and the like in exchange for their lives. In the land of exile, this was not a strange thing to do. However, at the peak 8-star martial saint level, such a thing had not happened for a long time. It had always been others who said this. This was a long-lost feeling, but there was nothing worth reminiscing about. They would rather not have it because it was a kind of humiliation. What kind of price can be worth the life of a peak 8-star martial saint? Chu Mu asked with a faint smile. The price was not uniform and there was no standard. It all depended on the situation. However, under normal circumstances, the life of a peak 8-star saint would definitely be more valuable than that of a 7-star saint. "I'm willing to hand over most of the items in my spatial ring," the waning moon sword saint said helplessly. If he had known that this would be the result, he would not have dared to have such thoughts. What a pity! Humans die for wealth and birds die for food. He might not die now, but he would lose most of his collection. That was his accumulation of hundreds of years. However, in order to survive, it was worth it. As long as he was alive, he could gain more. "I need sword guards. The 3 of you are barely qualified." Chu Mu smiled. This was something he had just thought of. This time, someone had used Lin Biruo to deal with him. Next time, someone might use the same trick. Even without Lin Biruo, the person who wanted to deal with him would definitely think of other ways. For example, if they captured his friends or Long Yunkong, he would definitely go and rescue them. However, Lin Biruo was here now. Since she was his maid, Chu Mu would not allow anyone to use her to threaten him, nor would he allow anyone to harm her. The best way was, of course, to increase Lin Biruo's strength so that she would have the ability to protect herself. However, Lin Biruo's strength was only at the high level of a 5-star martial saint. Even if she completed the cultivation of the clear water sky sword technique and grasped the essence, she would at most have the strength of an ordinary 5-star martial saint at the peak level. It would be very difficult to increase Lin Biruo's strength. It would take a very long time. Since that was the case, he could only rely on external forces and find a few powerful people to be her bodyguard. It just so happened that the waning moon sword saint and the other 2 were all 8-star martial saints. They were all experienced and powerful. They were very suitable candidates. The expressions of the waning moon sword saint and the other 2 immediately changed. They would rather give up all their treasures than become someone's bodyguard. Bodyguards were always inferior. In the land of exile, they were considered powerful people with some reputation. Even if the other party was a 9-star martial saint, they would not agree to become someone's bodyguard. Die or become a bodyguard. Choose one. Chu Mu knew what they were thinking just by looking at their expressions. He threw out this sentence directly. Sir, please don't force us. The waning moon sword saint said with difficulty. His originally feminine face became even more gloomy. The sword saint to the right of the waning moon sword saint suddenly moved. He exploded with his fastest speed. He could swear that this was the fastest speed he had ever exploded with. He did not run away. Instead, he flew towards Lin Biruo. He planned to capture Lin Biruo to threaten Chu Mu. From the fact that this maidservant was captured to lure Chu Mu out of the city, it could be seen that this maidservant was very important to him. Therefore, he felt that as long as he captured this maidservant, he could use her as a protective talisman to let him leave alive without any losses. However, he was right, but he did it wrong. The moment his body moved, Chu Mu's sword also flicked upwards. In the air, a white sword aura instantly shot out from the void and slashed downward. The killing sword of Heaven's Scar. The white sword chi slashed down with unparalleled speed. This 8-star martial saint was hit by the killing sword of Heaven's Scar before he could even get close to Lin Biruo. He could not dodge. The protective sword aura on his body was extremely fragile. It was instantly torn apart like a thin piece of paper. He paused and raised his sword in an attempt to block. However, with Chu Mu's strength as a 6-star martial saint, the killing sword of Heaven's Scar was not something an ordinary 8-star martial saint could block. As the sword slashed down, the sword of Heaven's Scar was split into two. Even his primordial spirit was cut open and shattered. The killing sword of Heaven's Scar was the weakest of all the sword moves. However, compared to other sword moves, it was definitely much more powerful. Another instant kill right before their eyes. This made the waning moon sword saint and the rock sword saint's eyelids twitch. They felt cold all over and their palms became wet. Being killed was nothing. However, to be killed in an instant with such a clean strike, they could not help but feel terrified. Have you two thought it through? Chu Mu's sword fell slowly. It was as if he had not just killed an 8-star martial saint. Instead, it was as if he had just killed a cockroach. Or, you can try to end up like him. This sentence made the waning moon sword saint and the rock sword saint want to cry. Yes, they really wanted to cry right now. I won't make things difficult for the two of you. Let's set a time limit of 100 years. After 100 years, you will be free. Chu Mu lowered the conditions slightly. 100 years? The rock sword saint asked. Are you sure it's 100 years? The waning moon sword saint repeated. 100 years. Swear by the way of the sword. Chu Mu said seriously. The waning moon sword saint and the rock sword saint looked at each other. Compared to losing their lives, 100 years as a bodyguard was not an unacceptable thing. Moreover, when he thought about it again, although the other party was only a 6-star saint, his strength was comparable to an ordinary 9-star saint. Such talent was completely above the 6-star saint. It would not be a waste to follow such a person. Thinking of this, they felt much better. Then, they swore by the way of the sword. Chu Mu naturally swore as well. The content of the oath was that he would let the two of them go free after 100 years. After swearing, the waning moon sword saint and the rock sword saint were relieved. Since it was already a done deal, there was no way to go back on it. Young Master. The two of them also changed their greetings and called Chu Mu Young Master. To Chu Mu, this greeting was more appropriate. Then, Chu Mu woke Lin Biruo up. After a brief explanation, Lin Biruo calmed down, but she looked a little depressed. Young Master, I'm really sorry. Lin Biruo said, I'm too useless. Just work hard and improve your strength. Chu Mu said. Then, he introduced the waning moon sword saint and the rock sword saint to Lin Biruo. Lin Biruo made up her mind to work harder and improve her strength. After hearing Chu Mu's introduction, she was very surprised. The waning moon sword saint and the rock sword saint were two very famous experts in Bloodbath City. They were at the peak of the 8-star martial saint level. Now, they were the young master's guards. Lin Biruo felt that the young master was becoming more and more mysterious. But so what? She just needed to focus on serving the young master and improving her strength. After collecting the spoils and disposing of the corpses, Chu Mu brought Lin Biruo and the two new guards back to Bloodbath City. The two guards' purpose was to protect Lin Biruo. Sometimes they had to help Chu Mu deal with some matters. Young master, 2 of the 4 guards are Lin Ziqi's guards, and the other 2 are Fei Yang's guards. The Rock Sword Saint said. Fei Yang. Chu Mu frowned slightly. Young master, Fei Yang is the one who stood on Lin Ziqi's side against you at the auction. He's the only son of a vice-sect leader of the Ghost Dragon sect in Zhanlong City. He's at the early stage of the 7th sky of Wangu. He can be considered a genius of the 2nd division. Fei Yang. After repeating this name, Chu Mu changed the topic. He had his own plans, but he didn't say it yet. At the auction, what was the final price for the last 9 spots of the Black Mystery Realm? After bidding for the first spot, Chu Mu left the auction. He was curious about the final price of the last 9 spot. After all, his bid was 1,000 silver hearts. The Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint also left after Chu Mu. However, they heard the news later, so they knew the final price of the last 9 spots. The 2nd to 8th spots were sold for more than 1,000 silver hearts, but not by much. The 9th spot was sold for more than 1,100, and the 10th spot, which was the last spot, was sold for 1,300. Chapter 1776. In a pitch-black sinner cave, there were continuous roars, like the roars of a group of beasts. A sword light lit up with a slight hum. The sword light shone in the darkness, and a face was faintly discernible. The agile sword light was incomparably sharp, and wherever it passed, sinners were killed. These sinners were all dark iron sinners, and were not considered strong. The agile sword light flickered, and after a few minutes, it quieted down. The dark iron sinners were all killed. It's been almost 3 years, I wonder how they are doing? And Chu Mu, how strong is he now? A voice that seemed to be talking to itself sounded, and then fell silent again. Blood Slaughter City, Long Yunkong's manor. The Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint were practicing sword technique. It had been a few months since they became Chu Mu's guards. They basically stayed in the manor and rarely went out. Every day, he would cultivate and practice his swordsmanship. Just like that, the days passed one after another. This was quite peaceful, and he was not disturbed at all. However, when they saw Chu Mu practicing sword techniques, they didn't see anything at first, and felt that it was very ordinary. After watching a few more times, they realized that it was extremely profound, and was far beyond their current level. They were bold enough to ask for advice, and in the end, they couldn't even last a few moves under Chu Mu's sword. Since they swore on their swordsmanship, as his guards, Chu Mu was also willing to teach them sword techniques. Therefore, after a few months, the Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint both felt that they had a new understanding of sword technique. Some areas that they didn't understand and some mistakes in the past were all cleared up, and they were all corrected. The two felt that the power of their sword techniques had increased by at least 20 to 30%, which also meant that their strength had increased. At their level, it was very difficult to increase their strength, unless they obtained more powerful sword techniques, or broke through their current cultivation level and reached the Aeon 9 heavens. However, although the two of them were famous in Bloodbath City, and even in the entire land of exile, they were still free sword cultivators, the kind that did not belong to any sect. To be able to come this far, other than having some talent, it was also due to the inheritance he had received and his own hard work, as well as the accumulation of walking on the edge of life and death again and again. At this point in time, the pinnacle of the 8-star saint level was almost their limit. It was extremely difficult for them to break through to the 9-star saint level. It was close to impossible. One had to know that the two of them had been stuck at the pinnacle of the 8-star saint tier for 30 to 40 years without any opportunity to break through. Since they were unable to make a breakthrough, they could only try their best to improve their strength in other ways. However, over the past few decades, they had already tried their best to improve whatever they could. They felt that they had reached their limit. Therefore, they wanted to obtain a place to enter the Black God's secret land and improve their cultivation strength once again. However, it was a pity that they did not succeed in the end. They even sacrificed themselves and became someone else's guard. However, they were more than willing to do so now. After all, under Chu Mu's guidance, their sword techniques had improved. One had to know that their sword techniques had been stuck at a bottleneck for decades and had not improved at all. They had thought that they had reached their limit. They did not expect that they could continue to improve. This feeling was really good. Moreover, they could also see that even if their sword techniques had improved, they could not be compared to Chu Mu's. This meant that their sword techniques still had a lot of room for improvement. However, no matter how much room for improvement there was, they still needed corresponding guidance. Otherwise, look at themselves, they had not improved at all after decades of cultivation. Of course, as guards, they did not dare to constantly seek guidance from Chu Mu. Therefore, the two of them sparred frequently to find out their shortcomings and improve on them. After being captured and used to threaten Chu Mu, Lin Biruo cultivated even harder after returning. Therefore, in the past few months, Lin Biruo had completely mastered the first of the last 3 moves of the Green Water Sky sword technique and grasped its essence. She was also very familiar with the second move and was only a hair's breadth away from grasping its essence. As for the third move, which was the most mysterious and powerful move, it was already in its embryonic form. As for Chu Mu, because he had the dragon-devouring jade pendant, he did not need to spend time cultivating the divine wilderness sword essence. He used the nearly 4 hours to comprehend the sword universe and so on. With ample time, Chu Mu's comprehension was naturally more effective. He realized that ever since he comprehended the true meaning of the sword, not only did he have a deeper understanding of the top sword moves that he had cultivated in the past, the few sword moves that he had created were also more perfect. Even his comprehension of the sword universe was much smoother than before. Chu Mu was very glad that he had come to the land of exile and comprehended the true meaning of the sword from the Black God Great Sword. Otherwise, if he had stayed in the deep blue world, he did not know how many years it would take for him to comprehend the true meaning of the sword. As the saying goes, 1 step ahead, 1 step ahead. The earlier one comprehended, the earlier the harvest. To a genius, the difference between a year earlier and a year later was not small. Originally, Chu Mu had comprehended various sword techniques from the True God Sword Sect's forest of 10,000 sword steels. He still had 7 or 8 top sword moves that he had yet to cultivate. After comprehending the true meaning of the sword, those sword shadows were all integrated into the central sword shadow, and the sword moves were also integrated into it. When Chu Mu comprehended the true meaning of the sword, he directly comprehended the remaining sword shadow. In terms of cultivation, due to the dragon-devouring jade, Chu Mu's cultivation had also increased. However, he was still at the mid-stage of the 6th firmament of the Wangu realm, but he was closer to the late stage. After a few months, the overall harvest was not bad. Today, when everyone was practicing their sword techniques, a stranger came to the manor. This person was clad in silver-white armor, and the aura that he emitted made it clear that he was an 8-star martial saint. "Is Chu Mu here?" The newcomer stopped in front of the manor and asked in a deep voice that sounded like thunder. Lin Biruo stopped practicing her sword techniques and quickly came to the manor's entrance. The Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint also stopped practicing and hurried over. "Why are you looking for my young master?" Lin Biruo asked fearlessly when she saw the 8-star martial saint clad in silver-white armor. The Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint stood behind Lin Biruo and looked at the silver-white armor expert. It was easy to recognize that the silver-white armor belonged to the Silver Manor. "Please pass this invitation to Chu Mu." The 8-star martial saint took out a palm-sized invitation and passed it to Lin Biruo. After Lin Biruo received the invitation, the Silver Manor's 8-star martial saint turned around and left. "Young master, this is the invitation from the Silver Manor's guards." Lin Biruo passed the invitation to Chu Mu. The invitation was palm-sized and silver-white in color. It had a strong metallic texture. When Chu Mu received the invitation, he immediately knew that it was made of silver-white stone. When he opened the invitation, a shocking sword intent shot out and targeted Chu Mu. The eternal sword will was unleashed, clashing with the sword will and defeating it. After the sword essence was defeated, words began to appear on the post. They were the same silver-white words, but they were extremely clear. They protruded from the surface of the invitation as if they were about to fly out. Every word seemed to be formed by countless sharp swords, exuding a shocking sharpness and coldness. Peerless sword edge, contending for the world. Chu Mu's eyes seemed to be dyed with a layer of silver white. His pitch-black pupils seemed to have turned into the shape of a sword. The shocking sharpness and coldness made the waning moon sword saint and the other martial saint shiver. "The 3 years agreement is coming. Please be on time at the Dragon's Head Mountain." There was only one short sentence on the invitation, and it was signed off by the name of Bai Chun. Bai Chun. Chu Mu's lips curved into a faint smile. It had been almost 3 years since Bai Chun had declared that he would fight Yi Futian in 3 years. Counting the time, it had been 3 years since Huang Xiaolong had entered the land of exile. His cultivation had risen from the early 4th heavenly stage to the mid-6th heavenly stage. It could be considered a huge leap. As for his strength, Chu Mu was certain that he was a 9-star martial saint. However, he wasn't sure if he could contend against a mid-level 9-star martial saint. "However, I'll find out in this battle," Chu Mu thought to himself. He couldn't help but feel excited. Without a doubt, Bai Chen would be a strong opponent. He was one of the 6 stars in the land of exile, an immemorial monstrous genius, the young master of the Silver Palace, and possessed the inheritance of a peerless expert. All these factors contributed to his strength. When he was at the early 7th heavenly stage, he could contend against a low-level 9-star martial saint. A year ago, Bai Chen's cultivation had reached the mid-6th heavenly stage. His strength was definitely close to that of a mid-level 9-star martial saint. Now that Huang Xiaolong's cultivation had increased, Bai Chen wouldn't have stayed the same. He would definitely be stronger than he was a year ago. "I wonder how Gu Luankong and the other 2 are doing?" Chu Mu thought about Gu Luankong, Yang Zhantian, and Lian Hongyun. It had been 3 years since Huang Xiaolong entered the land of exile. He had gained a lot. The 3 of them were protected by the luck of the heavenly blue list. Even if they encountered any danger, they would be able to survive. Moreover, their strength should have increased by a lot. One should know that the 3 of them could be considered as immemorial monstrous geniuses. There are still 26 years left. When the time comes, you guys better not disappoint me. Chu Mu thought to himself. This was the agreement that they had made. When they returned to the deep blue world in 30 years, they had to have the strength to contend against or even defeat a peerless expert. Putting away his thoughts, Chu Mu looked at the 3 of them and said, "Let's go to Dragon Head Mountain." "Yes, young master." Then, the 4 of them left the manor and quickly headed out of Bloodbath City. When they arrived outside Bloodbath City, Chu Mu took out a yellow flying shuttle. Bai Ruo drove it and Chu Mu and the other 2 boarded it. After it started, they quickly headed towards Dragon Head Mountain. In the outside world, there was a rumor that one of the 6 stars, the Silver Sword Star, would fight with Chu Mu on Dragon Head Mountain. Chapter 1777. Dragon Head Mountain was a very strange mountain. It was 999 zhang tall, and its whole body was dark bronze. The whole mountain was made of bronze ores, which was why it was also called Copperhead Mountain. Dragon Head was the symbol of the leader of dragons in ancient times. In ancient times, there were two world-famous experts who agreed to fight on Dragon Head Mountain. Since then, Dragon Head Mountain had become famous. Sword saints who were not weak or famous would often choose Dragon Head Mountain as the place for the battle. Now, one of the 6 major stars, the Silver Sword Star, had agreed to fight Chu-Mu, a genius who had been in the limelight in recent years. The location of the battle was Dragon Head Mountain, which was widely known. Bai Chun and Chu-Mu had not arrived yet, but many people had already gathered at the foot of Dragon Head Mountain. These people were all relatively close to Mount Longsho. Naturally, they had rushed here to watch the battle. The battle between the two geniuses was not to be missed. In the distance there were still people coming. A flying shuttle quickly approached and stopped. The door opened and a person walked out. He was dressed in black and his face was cold. His eyes were dark and his long hair was loose. He walked over empty-handed, and there was a cold aura around him. It's Zhou Jianming. Zhou Jianming, the genius of the first array, who is ranked in the top 3, has also been attracted. This is a duel between the Silver Sword Star, one of the 6 great stars. Even if his opponent is not as good as him, with the reputation of the Silver Sword Star, perhaps even the other great stars will come, let alone the genius of the first array. It's said that Zhou Jianming wants to become the 7th star. The 7th star, it's difficult, too difficult. Since ancient times, which genius didn't want to become the 7th star? Unfortunately, no one succeeded. Not only Zhou Jianming, but people like Yu Kang and Ji Ying also want to become the 7th star. Hey, who's here? Everyone looked over and saw people walking out of other flying shuttles. They were the so-called geniuses of the first array, Yu Kang, Ji Ying, and the others. In the land of exile, the top geniuses from the 6 major planets were represented. There were 30 geniuses from the first array, 100 geniuses from the second array, and 500 geniuses from the third array. It sounded like a lot, but there were hundreds of millions of cultivators in the land of the exiles. Only a little more than 1,000 of them could be listed as famous geniuses. The ratio was very small. Of course, this didn't mean that there were only this group of geniuses. There were still quite a few who weren't ranked because of various reasons. At this time, a 100-meter-long black shuttle whizzed over at an astonishing speed and stopped at the foot of Longsho Mountain, blowing up a cloud of dust. When the dust settled, 9 figures walked out of the black shuttle. The one in the lead was a young man in a black robe. This young man's black robe was different from Zhou Jianming's black robe. It looked more exquisite, and the color was deeper and purer. Zhao Wuji. When Zhou Jianming saw the young man, his pupils shrank and he shouted in a low voice. So it's Zhou Jianming. The young man in the black robe smiled with a sense of superiority. We haven't seen each other for half a year. Has your strength improved? Zhou Jianming's face darkened as if his weakness had been poked. Whether or not I have improved, we'll know once we try. Haha, half a year ago you weren't my opponent. Now, the gap between us will only be bigger. Zhao Wuji laughed. When the crowd heard this, there was an uproar. Zhou Jianming, who was ranked 3rd in the first array, was defeated by this person? It should be known that it was often difficult to determine the ranking of the top geniuses because their strength was about the same. Therefore, when people described Zhou Jianming, they would say that he was in the top 3 and not 3rd, 2nd, or 1st. Who is Zhao Wuji? I don't know. I've never heard of this name. Looking at this scene, he must have a strong background. Then let's try. As a genius, Zhou Jianming was proud and unyielding. He wouldn't be dispirited, afraid, or coward just because he lost once. On the contrary, after he lost half a year ago, he cultivated even harder. After half a year, his strength had actually improved. The smile on Zhao Wuji's face froze, and a cold light flashed through his eyes as he stared at Zhou Jianming. Zhou Jiaming looked back at him without fear. Yu Kang and Ji Ying stood not far away, their expressions somewhat solemn. They were very clear about who Zhou Jiaming was. He was a genius ranked third in the first array. It could be said that he was second only to the geniuses of the 6 major stars. They were also very clear about Zhou Jiaming's strength, because they had fought more than once. It was difficult to determine who was better. But now they heard that Zhou Jiaming was defeated. Being defeated was nothing. There were many sword saints that were stronger than them, and most of them were older than them. But the problem was that Zhao Wuji seemed to be of the same age as them. Competing with the same generation was different from competing with the older generation. "You're not my opponent." The light in Zhao Wuji's eyes disappeared, and a smile hung on the corner of his mouth as he said casually. Immediately, he turned his head and looked at the top of the Dragon Head Mountain. His eyes were blazing. "That's where I should go." Zhao Wuji did not conceal his voice in the slightest. Thus, everyone in the surroundings could hear him clearly. "Does he mean that he wants to challenge the 6 major stars?" Someone exclaimed. "He's overestimating himself. Who is it that wants to challenge me?" A loud laughter rang out. A loud and clear voice came from the other side, approaching from afar. A tall and sturdy figure rushed over at an astonishing speed. He was like a charging bull, and a powerful aura followed him. It was ferocious and domineering, as if it was a war between 1,000 soldiers and 100 soldiers. The appearance of this person caused everyone to reveal a shocked expression. "Tu Qianjun! The blood-slaughtering sword star has appeared. Heavens, I actually saw the true body of one of the 6 major stars." To some cultivators, the 6 major stars were just a name, a legend. Perhaps they had only heard of legends in their lives, but had never seen the true body. For most of the people present, it was their first time seeing the 6 major stars. Therefore, this was also why when the news of Bai Chen challenging Chu Mu spread, many people didn't even think before rushing over. They were afraid they would be too late. To them, whether Chu Mu was Bai Chen's opponent was unknown. However, it was likely that Chu Mu wasn't Bai Chen's opponent. The main reason they came here was to see Bai Chen's true body. Seeing a silver sword star attack at a close distance would be something to brag about in the future. They thought that the other 5 major stars might send people here, but the possibility was low. Unexpectedly, someone really came. Tu Qianjun, the young master of blood-slaughtering city, one of the 6 major stars, the blood-slaughtering sword star. "You. The moment Tu Qianjun arrived, he glared. His might was awe-inspiring, as if 1,000 soldiers would flee. No one dared to look him in the eye. His gaze landed on Zhou Jiaming's face. Zhou Jiaming only felt an incomparably blinding sensation in his eyes, as though 2 tyrannical swords were stabbing towards him. The might contained within was astonishing, and the ferocious might towered up into the heavens. In less than 3 breaths, Zhou Jiaming shifted his gaze away, unable to continue looking at Tu Qianjun. Otherwise, his mind might be shaken. After Zhou Jiaming shifted his gaze away, he knew that he couldn't compare to Tu Qianjun. The difference was too obvious. Even if he was unwilling, he could only accept it. Tu Qianjun did not feel proud at all. His gaze shifted, passing by Yu Kang and Ji Ying before meeting Zhao Wuji's gaze. Zhao Wuji's eyes shone with a dense light. A speck of purple light spread out in the depths of his pupils. "Interesting." Tu Qianjun grinned, and a trace of scarlet color suddenly spread out from the depths of his pupils. It seemed to turn into 2 incomparably sharp and tyrannical blood swords that slashed out. When their gazes clashed, an invisible energy surged in the air. The purple light in Zhao Wuji's eyes instantly shattered, and his expression changed greatly. His body swayed, and he couldn't help but take a step back. "Your strength is not bad. Are you the one who said you wanted to challenge me?" Tu Qianjun smiled. "That's right." Zhao Wuji's eyes blazed, and he answered without fear. "You have guts. Unfortunately, your strength is still not enough." Tu Qianjun said. Surprisingly, Zhao Wuji did not refute. When their gazes clashed, he knew that there was indeed a gap between his strength and Tu Qianjuan's. Although he was not Tu Qianjuan's opponent now, it didn't mean that he didn't have a chance. In the past, there were people who thought so as well. However, when they saw the strength of the 6 stars, they realized that the gap between them was difficult to bridge. In the distance, a figure was like a flowing light, almost sticking close to the ground, flying over at an extremely fast speed. That speed was shocking, faster than most flying shuttles. Almost at the instant when everyone saw that flowing light, it had already arrived from the distance, rapidly approaching. Immediately, the flowing light dispersed, and a figure wearing a gilded robe appeared in front of everyone's eyes. This person's eyes were as bright as the stars, handsome and elegant. Feng Feixia, you're slower than me. Tu Qianjuan's loud voice sounded. The newcomer only glanced at him and ignored him. Feng Feixia. Feng Feixia, Flowing Light Sword Star Feng Feixia. I saw Flowing Light Sword Star's original body. Someone was very excited. It seemed that not only could they see Silver Sword Star Bai Chen, but they also unexpectedly saw Blood Slaughtering Sword Star Tu Qianjun and Flowing Light Sword Star Feng Feixia. 7 kings, 6 stars, 5 prefectures. Flowing Light King and Mysterious King did not establish any prefectures. It was not that they did not have the strength, but they did not want to. However, there were differences between the two. Mysterious King was a loner and had always been a loner. Flowing Light King, on the other hand, not only had an heir, but also a group of experts who were loyal to him. They were made up of 9-star saint experts and were called the Flowing Light Army. There were a total of 100 of them, and they were very famous in the land of exile. Flowing Light Sword Star Feng Feixia was naturally the young master of the Flowing Light Army. Will the other stars appear as well? This sentence made everyone even more expectant. Chapter 1778. The bright yellow shuttle was 1 foot above the ground. It flew quickly and left behind a cloud of dust. Lin Biruo was driving the shuttle while Chu Mu, the Waning Moon Sword Saint, and the Rock Sword Saint sat in it. Mount Dragonhead is also known as Mount Copperhead. The entire mountain is made of bronze and has existed for many years. The Rock Sword Saint explained, as you know, there are many spatial cracks in the sky in the land of exile. Therefore, no matter how powerful a cultivator is, he usually doesn't dare to fly in the sky for fear of encountering a spatial crack. Even a 9-star saint at the peak would be torn apart if he encountered one. Chumu nodded. Mount Dragonhead is a strange place. The space around Mount Dragonhead is extremely stable. There have never been any spatial cracks. Therefore, a battle on Mount Dragonhead will not be affected by the spatial cracks. Why is that? Chumu was curious. I don't know the details. However, it is said that the structure of Mount Dragonhead is special. It emits a special force field that stabilizes the space around it, the Rock Sword Saint said. Sir, as far as I know, Mount Dragonhead was originally thousands of feet tall. The bottom 3,000 feet was made of bronze ore, the middle 3,000 feet was made of bronze, the top 3,000 feet was made of bronze, and the top 3,000 feet was made of bronze. The top 1,000 feet gradually broke away from bronze and became purer and purer. It is said that the top 100 feet has already turned into copper essence, the Waning Moon Sword Saint said. Copper essence. Chumu was shocked. Copper essence was the essence of copper. It was the purest essence of copper. It was extremely rare and its value was countless times greater than that of bronze. Yes, the last 100 feet of copper essence is pure copper essence. Even a 9-star saint at the peak of the saint level would not be able to damage it at all. The hardness of pure copper essence had already surpassed that of silver stone. Unfortunately, copper essence was extremely hard. It was almost impossible to find any flame that could melt it. Therefore, it was difficult to use it to forge any swords. However, some swordsmithing grandmasters had thought of ways to obtain some copper essence powder and add it into swords to greatly increase the hardness of the swords. However, even a 9-star saint would find it difficult to damage the copper essence powder. It was naturally very difficult to use it to forge a sword. Therefore, every sword that was infused with the copper essence powder was extremely valuable. Then why did Mount Longsho become 999 zhang tall? Chu Mu asked. Rumor has it that many years ago, two powerful cultivators invited each other to battle on Dragon's Head Mountain. That battle was extremely intense. They fought from the foot of Dragon's Head Mountain all the way to the top of Dragon's Head Mountain. In the end, they destroyed the 10 feet of pure copper essence, causing Dragon's Head Mountain, which was originally 10,000 feet tall, to shrink to 999 feet. What kind of expert? Chu Mu was shocked. Could it be the 7 kings? No, not 7 kings, but 2 bright moon sword saints. Chu Mu nodded. Pure copper essence powder could withstand the full force attacks of a 9-star saint without being damaged at all. However, the attack power of a bright moon sword saint was many times more powerful than a normal 9-star saint. Especially when 2 bright moon sword saints were fighting at full force, it wasn't strange that the 10 feet of pure copper essence powder was destroyed in the end. Rumor has it that some of the most powerful swords in the world were forged by fusing the copper powder that was shattered. However, after so many years, no one knows where those powerful swords have gone, the rock sword saint said with a hint of yearning in his voice. Although those swords weren't spiritual swords, they were much harder and sharper than normal spiritual swords. The bright yellow flying shuttle stopped a few thousand meters away from Dragon's Head Mountain. It wasn't that it didn't want to go any closer, but it couldn't. There were many people at the foot of Dragon's Head Mountain. When Chu Mu and the other 3 walked down from the flying shuttle, they were a little surprised by the scene in front of them. This wasn't the barren Dragon's Head Mountain. It was clearly a market. It couldn't be helped. More and more people came after hearing the news, but the main characters weren't here yet. In this situation, people started to set up stalls here. On one hand, it was to kill time, and on the other hand, it was to see if they could sell something and earn some sinners' hearts. Since the first stall was set up, there would be a second, a third, and so on. As more and more stalls were set up, the market gradually took shape. However, the people who set up stalls were mostly those who were weaker. For example, some mid-level saint-level saints, a few 7-star saint-level saints, and a few 8-star saint-level saints. Why aren't they here yet? Could it be that they are too scared to come? That's right, all 6 stars have arrived. That Chu Mu's arrogance is truly enormous. Maybe they are really too scared to come. It doesn't matter if they don't dare to come. After all, their opponent is the Silver Sword Star. Anyway, I have already seen the original bodies of the 6 stars. This trip was worth it. With Lin Biruo, the Waning Moon Sword Saint, and the Rock Sword Saint, Chu Mu walked through the crowd and strode towards Dragon's Head Mountain. Suddenly, a gaze seemed to travel through time and space and landed on Chu Mu's face. "You are finally here." The owner of the gaze spoke. His voice was indifferent, but it shocked countless people. The person who spoke was one of the 6 stars, the Silver Sword Star, one of the main characters this time. Who was it that could make him speak like this? The other main character this time, Chu Mu. Chu Mu is here. Where is he? Let me see. That's him. He looks very ordinary. He can't be compared to my Silver Sword Star at all. A female cultivator curled her lip. Indeed, in terms of appearance, Chu Mu was not as good as Bai Chun. However, the cultivation world was not a place where appearance was important. Without strength, no matter how good-looking one was, it would only bring disaster. Ignoring the pointing and whispering of others, Chu Mu strode forward and met Bai Chen's gaze without fear. At this moment, the 6 stars were all standing at the waist of Dragon's Head Mountain, 100 feet above the ground. They looked down from above and saw everything clearly. When Chu Mu appeared, they had already noticed him. However, they did not know that he was one of the main characters this time, so they did not pay attention to him. However, after hearing Bai Chen's words, they immediately reacted. Their gazes landed on Chu Mu's face again. The light was so bright that it was as if it wanted to see through Chu Mu. Being stared at by 6 stars at the same time, the invisible pressure could be imagined. Even Chu Mu could clearly feel it. As for the 3 people walking behind Chu Mu, when they were slightly affected, they immediately felt the pressure greatly increase. It was as if they were being penetrated and seen through. Cold sweat appeared on their foreheads, and they were simply unable to continue walking forward. Under the gaze of the 6 stars, Chu Mu's steps were steady and his speed did not change at all. Step by step, he walked up Dragon's Head Mountain. When Chu Mu truly stepped into the range of Dragon's Head Mountain, he immediately felt a strange aura covering his entire body. It was as if his body had become slightly heavier. As he walked up step by step, Chu Mu could feel the strange aura become denser and denser. Under the influence of the aura, his body also became heavier and heavier. However, this kind of heaviness did not affect Chu Mu at all. Even an ordinary middle-level saint could completely resist this aura and not be affected. Chu Mu's perception was many times sharper than ordinary cultivators. He could clearly feel the change in the aura. He could feel that the surrounding space had become even more stable due to the influence of this aura. This is the special force field of Dragon's Head Mountain, right? Chu Mu thought to himself. With this kind of increase, how powerful would it be at the peak of 990 feet? How exhilarating would it be to fight a powerful monstrous genius in such an environment? As he thought of this, Chu Mu's blood seemed to boil. The pressure of the 6 stars' gazes did not make him cower. Instead, he walked even more resolutely. As for Chu Mu, he also glanced at the 6 stars and sized them up. Besides Bai Chen, this was the first time he had seen the other 5 stars. However, Chu Mu had already heard of their appearances, so he could recognize them at a glance. The tall and strong man with a pair of tiger eyes looked fierce and domineering. He was the blood-slaughtering sword star, Tu Qianjun, the young master of the blood-slaughtering hall. Chu Mu could see that this person's saint body was very strong and contained tyrannical power. Perhaps the level of his saint body was even higher than his own. His cultivation was at the initial level of the 7th layer of the Aeon, which seemed to be the lowest among the 6 stars. However, his saint body was the strongest and his strength was also extremely tyrannical. The person in black robes with a sinister smile on his face and dark eyes exuded an evil aura. He was the young master of the Black Demon Hall, the Black Demon Sword Star Heiju. He was wearing a purple robe with golden dragon patterns on it. His face was sharp and he looked extremely masculine. He didn't look as strong as Tu Qianjun, but he gave off a vigorous feeling. He was the young master of the dragon-slaying hall, the dragon-slaying sword star, Long Sha. He was wearing a tight green robe that was covered with a thin layer of gauze, revealing his curvaceous body. His face was also covered with a green veil, covering his face. His eyes were extremely special, there seemed to be a layer of green light covering his pupils. This person was a female, the young master of the Green Fiend Hall, the Green Fiend Sword Star Yan Qingya. Yan Qingya was the only female among the 6 stars. In fact, the Green Fiend King was also a female. Since ancient times, the Green Fiend King had always been a female. The last one was dressed in a long golden robe. His eyes were as bright as the stars, and his figure was slightly thin. At first glance, he gave off a very lively feeling. He stood there, but he seemed a little ethereal. He was the young master of the Flowing Light Army, the successor of the Flowing Light King, Flowing Light Sword Star Feng Feisha. The 6 stars were different from each other, but they had one thing in common: they were extremely eye-catching and outstanding. When they were in the middle of a crowd, they would immediately become the center of attention. They were like stars, emitting light and heat. The resplendent light was extremely dazzling, and one could see them when they raised their heads. The crowd quieted down, and countless spectators shut their mouths, staring at the 6 stars with blazing eyes, staring at Chu Mu. Just by looking at how Chu Mu walked towards the 6 stars, they knew that this person was extraordinary. Chapter 1779. Step by step, Chu Mu walked up. Everyone's eyes were on Chu Mu. At this moment, he was the center of attention. Very quickly, Chu Mu reached a height of 100 zhang. He was at the same level as the 6 stars. Everyone's eyes followed Chu Mu's body as he moved up. There seemed to be a tension-inducing factor floating in the air, causing people to feel stifled even when they breathed. In the distance, a group of 9-star martial saints were also watching. They belonged to the older generation, and they had come to watch the battle. Although Chu Mu's cultivation is weaker than Bai Chen, his aura is not intimidating at all. He's indeed a monstrous genius. His talent is probably not inferior to the 6 stars. It's a pity that he's still too weak. He's only at the middle stage of the 6th sky of Wangu. He can't be compared to the middle stage of the 7th sky of Wangu. The group of 9-star martial saints discussed. Chu Mu, I'll wait for you at the peak. When Chu Mu was at the same level as the 6 stars, Bai Chen spoke again. His indifferent voice entered everyone's ears. Right after Bai Chen spoke, he turned into a silver-white beam of light and flew to the summit at a shocking speed. Let's see if you're faster than me. Chu Mu smiled faintly. The moment Bai Chen moved, he also moved. With a swoosh, Lin Fan's body turned into a sword. He tore the sky apart and flew up at a shocking speed. His speed was actually not inferior to Bai Chen's. So fast. How can Chu Mu be so fast? He did not need to worry about the spatial cracks and could unleash his true speed. I'm going to play too. Tu Qianjun chuckled. He raised his foot and stomped down heavily. With a bang, there was an astonishing fluctuation of momentum. It was as if there were layers of ripples spreading out from under his feet. An incomparably tyrannical force erupted, propelling Tu Qianjuan's body. In an instant, it was as if he had transformed into an arrow shot from a giant crossbow. He took the lead at an astonishing speed, almost sticking close to the body of Dragon Head Mountain as he rapidly ascended. Just a little bit more and he would have been able to catch up to Chu Mu and Bai Chen. The moment Tu Qianjun moved, Long Shi didn't say a word. He took a step forward, and his body moved like a flood dragon. He Ju chuckled, and a black stream of light rolled up like a black tornado. Feng Feisha didn't move at all, and he directly turned into a golden stream of light. Yan Qingya's body was in a trance, and she turned into a green smoke. She was blown up by the wind and floated up. The 6 great stars each used their own unique move. Among the 7 kings, their strength was about the same. However, when it came to what they were good at, they were all different. If one were to talk about the strength of a saint body, then it would be the Blood Slaughter Manor's Manor Lord, Blood Slaughter King. And in terms of speed, it would be the Flowing Light King. As the inheritor of the 7 kings, the fastest of the 6 stars was the Flowing Light Sword Star, Feng Feisha. Therefore, in less than 2 breaths, Feng Feisha surpassed the other 4 stars and chased after Chu Mu and Bai Chen. Tu Qianjuan's speed was supported by his tyrannical strength and lacked flexibility. Therefore, he gradually fell behind. The other 3 were about the same. Feng Feisha quickly closed in on Chu Mu and Bai Chen. Among the 7 kings, in terms of absolute speed, the second was the Silver King. Therefore, Bai Chen had also inherited it. Sensing the other stars chasing after him, and also feeling the threat of Chu Mu's speed, Bai Chen increased his speed by 30%. With an even more astonishing speed, he quickly flew up. When Bai Chen increased his speed, Chu Mu also increased his speed. He could clearly feel that the higher he went, the more obvious the special force field of Dragon Head Mountain was. The stronger it was, the more obvious it stabilized the surrounding space, and the more obvious it restrained people. With every step, the energy consumed gradually increased. In terms of cultivation, Chu Mu was inferior to Bai Chen. In terms of the quality of sword origin, there was also a gap between him and Bai Chen. After all, the cultivation technique of the Silver King's inheritance, although it couldn't be compared to the divine wilderness sword art, it wasn't too far off. Furthermore, the Silver King specialized in speed, so Bai Chen's speed was naturally very fast. Hence, in order to catch up to Bai Chen, Chu Mu had to use both his sword origin and his physique at the same time. Xiao Chen, who had grasped the technique of merging vital qi, could perfectly merge his sword origin and his physique to produce the greatest effect. As his muscles vibrated, he pushed the air behind him, which in turn pushed Chu Mu forward. Very soon, Chu Mu and Bai Chen crossed the bottom 300 feet and entered the middle 300 feet. The force field immediately strengthened and the two were affected even more clearly. The bottom 300 feet of Dragon Head Mountain was bronze ore, while the middle 300 feet was bronze Oregon. Bronze ore was different from bronze Oregon. It could be said that bronze ore was the product of refining bronze Oregon. It was even purer than bronze Oregon. However, even so, Chu Mu and Bai Chen quickly adjusted themselves and were not affected much. Feng Fei Sha followed closely behind the two. He was only a hair's breadth away from them and was quickly closing in. Feng Fei Sha started slightly later, but speed was his forte. In the blink of an eye, Feng Fei Sha caught up to Chu Mu and Bai Chen, running neck to neck. Then, Feng Fei Sha actually wanted to overtake the two. This time, it was a duel between Bai Chen and Chu Mu, not a duel with other people. Feng Fei Sha's actions clearly showed that he did not put Bai Chen and Chu Mu in his eyes. However, this was not a big deal. If they were willing to give him face, then they would. If they were not willing to give him face, then there was nothing they could do. After all, they had earned it themselves. Among the 6 great stars, their strength was about the same. There had never been a clear distinction between the strong and the weak, so there was no ranking. There wasn't much friendship between the 6 of them, because they were all rivals. None of them were willing to submit to the other, and all of them wanted to suppress the other and stand above everyone else. In fact, even though the 7 kings seemed to have a good relationship now, they were also competing with each other like this in the past. No matter what aspect, they would compete to see who was better. In fact, the 7 kings were also competing with each other now. It was just that they had changed from a competition on the surface to a competition in the dark. The competition between the 6 great stars was a continuation of the competition between the 7 kings. It had been passed down from generation to generation, and the competition between them had also continued. There had never been a clear winner. After being overtaken by Feng Fei Sha, Bai Chen's expression did not change. He only tried his best to increase his speed and stimulate his potential. Feng Fei Sha's actions were completely within his expectations. Therefore, he could only stimulate his speed to catch up and surpass Feng Fei Sha. As for Chu Mu, he was not angry. His opponent was Bai Chen, not Feng Fei Sha. Therefore, even though Feng Fei Sha surpassed him in speed, Chu Mu did not feel unhappy. He could see that Feng Fei Sha was targeting Bai Chen, not him. However, when Bai Chen's speed increased again, Chu Mu's speed also increased. It could be said that Bai Chen was using all his strength, and Chu Mu was also using all his strength. After crossing the middle 300 feet, they entered the top 300 feet. The top 300 feet was made of bronze. Bronze was refined from bronze stones, and its purity was 100%. The force field increased once again. At this moment, Feng Fei Sha, who was the first to enter, suddenly decreased his speed by more than 30%. Bai Chen and Chu Mu, who entered after him, also decreased their speed by more than 30%. This was because the force field's restriction had become very strong. After that, the other 4 great stars entered the top 300 feet. Their speed immediately decreased by more than 30%. They can actually maintain such speed in the top 300 feet. How terrifying! The 6 great stars are worthy of being called the 6 great stars. They are the most outstanding monstrous geniuses. It's not surprising for the 6 great stars to have this kind of performance. What surprised me more is that Chu Mu. His cultivation is the lowest, and he has not entered the high-level saint realm. However, his speed is not below Bai Chen's. Too shocking. Could he be the hidden inheritor of King Xuanmiao? A 9-star saint realm expert suddenly guessed. Immediately, everyone was stunned. King Xuanmiao's inheritor? That's possible. All this time, I have never heard of any inheritor of King Xuanmiao. Could it be that he has really hidden himself? Apart from this explanation, there is no other explanation for this person's origin. It's said that this person came from the outside world. It's most likely a rumor. With this person's talent, if he came from the outside world, why would he come here? Regarding Chu Mu's origin, when people mentioned it, there were 2 theories. One was that he was a monstrous genius from the outside world, and the other was that he was the hidden inheritor of King Xuanmiao. After a period of time, Feng Feisha was the first to enter the last 399 feet, followed by Bai Chen and Chu Mu. The last 399 feet had already started to turn into copper essence. The higher they went, the purer the copper essence. Therefore, with every 10 feet, the purer the copper essence was, the stronger the force field was, and the more obvious the restriction on them was. Feng Feisha's advantage began to weaken. The Flowing Light King was most proficient in speed, absolute speed. Feng Feisha had also inherited this. However, under the special force field of Mount Dragonhead, absolute speed was greatly suppressed. Without a strong enough body, it would be even harder to resist. The Flowing Light King was never proficient in body cultivation, and neither was Feng Feisha. Bai Chen's absolute speed was not as good as Feng Feisha's. His body cultivation was not as good as Tu Qianjuan's, but it was better than Feng Feisha's. A silver-white light flowed under Bai Chen's skin, faintly discernible. It actually managed to cancel out a portion of the copper essence's force field. Therefore, the suppression was not as obvious as Feng Feisha's. Bai Chen's speed increased, gradually approaching Feng Feisha's. Chu Mu's muscles started to tremble at an even faster speed, producing waves of tyrannical energy. That energy stacked layer by layer, shaking out and attacking the void within his body. It actually managed to repel the force field to a certain extent. Under the repel, the resistance Chu Mu felt decreased significantly. His speed also increased, not falling behind Bai Chen at all as he approached Feng Feisha. Feng Feisha could feel the 2 behind him closing in. Naturally, he was not willing to let them catch up to him. However, he was most proficient in absolute speed. Whether it was movement technique speed or attack speed, he did not have a good method to cancel out or repel the copper essence's force field. Bai Chen and Chu Mu both caught up. Then, they overtook Feng Feisha about 10 feet below. Chapter 1780. He is still so fast even after entering the last 99 zhang. As expected of one of the 6 stars. Many people had personally experienced the mysteries of Mount Dragonhead. For ordinary 7-star saints, once they entered the first 300 feet, they would begin to feel a great restriction, not to mention the last 99 feet. It was simply difficult to move forward. Even 8-star saints would not be able to move so easily. Only 9-star saints would be able to move more smoothly. Now, the 6 stars had all entered the 99-meter mark. Although their speed was affected, they were still fast. Chu Mu, on the other hand, wasn't inferior at all. In fact, he was even chasing after Bai Chen. Bai Chen was leading for a while, then Chu Mu was leading for a while. As for Feng Feisha, the 2 had already caught up to him and surpassed him by 1 zhang. Although Feng Feisha's speed was fast, he was not as good as the 2 in terms of resisting the external pressure. In such an environment, Feng Feishi's speed was also restricted. Who can reach the peak first? Needless to say, it will definitely be the Silver Sword Star. At this moment, Bai Chen and Chu Mu were only 10 meters away from the peak. However, the force field of these 10 meters was even stronger, and the restriction on them was even more obvious. Every step consumed even more energy. Reach the peak. This was the first battle between Chu Mu and Bai Chen. Whoever reached the peak first would be able to suppress the other in terms of aura. Feng Feisha did his best to climb up. However, although he was fast, he did not have a good method to resist the force field of Dragon Head Mountain. He could only be surpassed by the two. No matter how unwilling he was, there was nothing he could do. Speed was not the strong point of the other four, and they started later. They were unable to catch up to Chu Mu and Bai Chen. Bai Chen and Chu Mu were both accumulating energy as they stared at the peak. 2 zhang, 3 zhang, another 5 zhang. In an instant, Bai Chen's power exploded. A silver light flashed across his skin and his eyes turned silver white in an instant. His speed suddenly doubled. At the same time, Chu Mu also erupted. His muscles vibrated, and the sound of a drum suddenly rang out. With a bang, a terrifying power gushed out from his body, repelling the force field and increasing his speed. The two figures instantly distanced themselves from Feng Feisha. Their feet stepped on the peak. 2 purring sounds rang out simultaneously. Bai Chen and Chu Mu had both reached the peak at the same time. Dragon Head Mountain was 999 zhang tall. The highest point of the mountain was an irregular circle with some potholes on its surface. It had a radius of about 10 zhang. These 10 feet were where Bai Chen and Chu Mu would fight. Since the two of them were the first to reach the peak, the others also stopped and turned to head down the mountain. No matter what, Bai Chen was the main character this time. Even if they wanted to compete, they had already done so. If they still wanted to go up, they would be stealing the limelight and would shed all pretense of cordiality. As for staying here, what a joke. Even if they were from the 6 great stars, they would still feel tired after a long time. Bai Chen and Chu Mu reached the peak. If they wanted to fight on the peak, they would first have to resist the force field of Dragon Head Mountain. That would increase their energy consumption. Fighting under such circumstances was undoubtedly even more dangerous. Chu Mu, your cultivation is not as good as mine. You can use your full strength. I will fight you with my normal strength, Bai Chen said. His voice was not as indifferent as before. There was a hint of heat in his voice. It was the kind of heat that came from meeting an opponent. Bai Chen was in the middle stage of the 7th sky of the Wangu realm, while Chu Mu was in the middle stage of the 6th sky of the Wangu realm. That was why Bai Chen said that. He believed that Chu Mu definitely had a secret technique, and he also had a secret technique. Once he used it, his strength would naturally increase. That was why he said that Chu Mu could use his full strength, while he would fight with his normal strength. Chu Mu did not reply. He opened his hands, and 2 spiritual swords jumped out of the void and into his hands. 2 spiritual swords. Bai Chen's eyes lit up. Is this person proficient in dual sword techniques? The people below Dragon Head Mountain were shocked. Dual sword techniques were harder to master than single sword technique. If one was not careful, they could injure themselves. Even if they did not injure themselves, they would not be able to use their full strength because the 2 swords would hinder and restrict each other. That was why those who dared to use dual swords were all proficient in dual sword technique. Otherwise, they would be a joke. However, there were too few people who were proficient in dual swords since ancient times. Now that Chu Mu was holding 2 swords with both hands, it seemed that he had a high level of attainment in dual sword technique. A silver light flowed through the 5 fingers of Bai Chen's right hand. As it flickered, a silver-white sword appeared in his palm, giving off a trace of spirituality. It was also a spiritual sword. This sword was called the Silver Sword. The silver spiritual sword was the inheritance of the Silver Branch. Every generation of stars needed to nurture their own spiritual swords. Naturally, there was a corresponding inheritance method. When the silver spiritual sword appeared, a trace of sharpness rippled out. The Silver King's branch had unimaginable attainments in the Tao of metal. Chu Mu immediately felt that he was locked on by an indescribable sharpness. The surrounding void seemed to be filled with shocking invisible sword chi. It swam in the void, cutting everything. Kill! With a low shout, Bai Chen's sword turned into a silver light. Under the incomparable sharpness, it cut open the void. Even the strange and powerful force field of Dragon Head Mountain was cut open. In an instant, the silver-white sword light appeared in front of Chu Mu. Its shocking sharpness pierced through, causing Chu Mu's hair to stand on end. He raised both swords and crossed them. The sword light suddenly flashed and pierced through the silver sword light, attacking Bai Chen. It seemed like a move that would injure both sides. Bai Chen's figure suddenly disappeared. The silver sword light also jumped and strangely drew an arc, attacking Chu Mu from the side. The silver sword seemed to have turned into a silver lightning. It could be hard or soft. In an instant there were thousands of changes. Every change could be said to be extreme. It was incomparably mysterious and unfathomable. With both swords in hand, Chu Mu did not show any signs of weakness. He displayed his exquisite sword skills and continuously counterattacked. In a flash, the mountain collapsed and the earth cracked. The terrifying sword light whistled and covered a radius of 10 feet. Every sword light was distorted under the powerful force field of Dragon Head Mountain. It scattered and turned into countless rays of light that shot out in all directions. At the foot of Dragon Head Mountain, the group of people was dumbfounded. The exquisite and powerful swordsmanship was displayed in front of their eyes. It was very shocking. What a terrifying sword skill! As expected of the Silver Sword Star. That Chu Mu's dual swords are also very impressive. The group of 9 star saints gathered in one place also had grave expressions on their faces. They were 9 star saints and could see more clearly. It was also easier for them to see the profoundness. They are only using the most basic sword skills to fight. It is incomparably exquisite. This level of attainment in sword skills far surpasses ours. No matter how hard a normal cultivator trains, there is still an insurmountable gap between them and geniuses. Bai Chen's silver sword carried a shocking sharpness. It carried the power of laws as it tore through the sky. It was either straight or curved. It was extremely mysterious as it continuously attacked. Each sword was closely connected. Each sword was deadly and extremely sharp. Chu Mu's dual swords move. They were either sharp, heavy, domineering, or soft. As they changed, not only did he block Bai Chen's attacks, but he also continuously counterattacked. Wherever the sword light passed, it was like there was a line between the sky and the water. There was no beginning or end, mysterious and unfathomable. The beams of sword light were like a line between the sky and the water. They were straight or curved, intertwining with each other. There was no beginning or end. They were connected and covered all directions. The 999 zhang tall Dragon Head Mountain was covered by the sword light. The sword light was endless, like a vast ocean. The silver sword light, the red sword light, and the gold and silver intertwined sword light intertwined. Each sword light was extremely terrifying and could easily kill an 8-star saint expert. The 10 zhang radius was where Chu Mu and Bai Chen were going to fight. Whoever was struck down would lose. What an exquisite dual sword skill! I have never seen such a dual sword skill before. The other 5-star geniuses were extremely shocked. The 5 of them, including Bai Chen, did not know about dual sword skills. This was also the first time they had seen such an exquisite dual sword skill. They were amazed. Even the star geniuses could not help but be astonished. If they were already like this, there was no need to talk about the others. Those below 9-star saint level could not see the profoundness of the dual sword skill. They only saw sword light, densely packed and endless, dazzling their eyes. However, they were not willing to close their eyes and rest, afraid that they would miss out on such an exciting scene. A duel between star geniuses was rarely seen in several hundred years. Obscure and ear-piercing sounds came one after another from the 999 zhang tall peak, entering everyone's ears. The weaker mid-level martial saints found it hard to bear. Their primordial spirits trembled, and their qi and blood surged. They could only retreat continuously. Only after retreating several thousand meters did they barely manage to withstand the duel. Stars appeared in their eyes. They could not help but close their eyes. The corners of their eyes were sore and stinging. Even 7-star martial saints had to close their eyes to withstand the duel. The blazing glory spiritual sword circled around, and the red sword light rippled out. It charged forward, and the eternal spiritual sword followed behind, piercing through the void. This sword was out of Bai Chen's expectations. He was almost hit by Chu Mu's sword. Bai Chen was indeed a star genius. He reacted quickly. The silver sword light shook, and the air shook. The silver sword light traversed the sky, tearing rings and shattering Chu Mu's sword light. At the same time, it was also shattered. Streaks of sword light streaked across the ground. The ground was full of potholes, but it was not damaged in the slightest. The hardness of the pure copper essence was astonishing. When the sword light streaked across, it actually emitted a little bit of sparks like the sound of metal clashing. Close, colliding, fighting, brushing past each other, and turning around to attack. The two sword skills were exquisite. Their footwork was also exquisite. Their body techniques were mysterious, and they went with the flow. Once again, they collided. Under the huge force, the two retreated to the edge of 100 zhang. Good. You can actually block my probing. You are qualified to make me use my strength, Bai Chen said, his voice excited. Likewise. Chu Mu smiled faintly. The crowd below was dumbfounded. Chapter 1781. Dragon Head Mountain, 999 zhang peak. Bai Chen and Chu Mu faced each other. At this moment, the endless sword light and the countless sword rays disappeared without a trace. However, the previous confrontation seemed to be clear in the eyes of the spectators. However, what the two of them said caused everyone's expression to change greatly, and they were extremely shocked. Probing. That level of battle was just a probing. If it wasn't a probing, how shocking and intense would it be? Soon they found out. My silver lineage's sword technique is called the silver sword technique, Bai Chen said slowly. His voice gradually turned cold and sharp, and there seemed to be a silver light flickering in his eyes. He slowly raised the silver sword in his hand, and a bright silver light appeared from the tip of the sword, spreading to the rest of the sword. It was sharp and murderous. The shocking sharpness and invisible sword aura spread out in all directions. The first move, myriad silver light. Bai Chen's figure flickered, and the silver longsword in his hand released a silver light. As the silver light flickered, it turned into strands of silver light, shining like stars. There were a total of 10,000 strands, and they spread out in all directions. In an instant, Chu Mu was completely covered. There were no blind spots, and there was nowhere to dodge. Every strand of silver light carried a shocking power of law, and a shocking silver sword intent. It was extremely sharp, and it had a shocking power. It penetrated the void and attacked from all directions, directly enveloping Chu Mu. Silver Sword Technique's first move, Myriad Silver Light. Looks like Bai Chen has completely grasped the essence of the Silver Sword Technique's first move. The 5 stars looked and thought to themselves. They all had their own inherited grade sword technique. For example, Bai Chen cultivated the Silver Sword Technique, which was a top-tier inherited grade sword technique. As for the higher-grade King Sword techniques, with their current strength, they were unable to grasp them. Chu Mu's 2 swords moved, and black vortexes condensed. 6 Dao Sword Technique. 6 black vortexes spread out in all directions, spinning at high speed. With the combination of sword intent and defensive intent, the 6 Dao sword technique's power increased, and its devouring ability became stronger. Strands of silver light were immediately absorbed by the spinning black vortex. Like moths to a flame, they were sucked into the vortex and disappeared. Chu Mu not only knew how to defend, but also how to attack. As the silver light dissipated, a sword was raised and chopped down with astonishing power. The incomparably sharp fiery red sword light tore through the sky and cut through everything. Solid, nothingness, existence or non-existence, everything was cut, split, and shattered by this sword. Dao cutter sword style. The sword seemed to have cut open the sky. What is Dao? The power of heaven and earth was one of the manifestations of the Dao. The power of laws was a level of the power of heaven and earth. Dao severing, Dao severing. With a single slash, the power of the world and the power of the laws was severed. With one sword strike, heaven and earth were clearly distinguished. What sword technique is this? What a terrifying sword technique! Everyone exclaimed, and Bai Chen's expression changed. Such a sword technique was too profound and unfathomable. Chu Mu's sword style was created by comprehending the various mysteries of the forest of 10,000 sword steels. Then, he combined it with the sword universe and his own accumulation of sword technique. Finally, he created it himself. After continuously refining it and comprehending the true intent of the sword, it became even more perfect. Hence, the current Dao cutter sword style was much stronger than in the past. For a time, Bai Chen felt that the world in front of him disappeared, leaving only that sword light chopping down. The sword light was a world. Fourth move, silver brilliance. Bai Chen muttered. The sword in his hand gave off an extremely intense silver light. It was so bright that no one could look at it directly. It seemed to have turned into a blazing silver sun. Suddenly, it brought with it a myriad of phenomena, giving off a valiant aura. Terrifying metal laws revolved and rippled, bursting forth with astonishing might. The silver sword intent was extremely sharp, vividly displaying sharpness. This sword technique looked like a defensive move, but it was actually filled with offensive power. The surrounding spiritual energy immediately stirred, turning into a vortex. The strange force field of Dragon Head Mountain also seemed to be affected. The sword light chopped down and a silver light soared. This was an earth-shattering clash. There were no surprises. A horrifying force shot out in all directions, instantly piercing through the strange force field of Dragon Head Mountain and tearing it apart. The spiritual energy vortex that gathered in the surroundings also instantly crumbled. The sword light shattered and the two swords clashed. One sword chopped down and the other flicked up. Countless sparks filled the air. The sword in Chu Mu's left hand instantly stabbed out. The true intent of the sword and the true intent of the stab gathered. Bai Chen's expression changed. He pointed with his left hand, and his fingers instantly turned silver white. The fingertips clashed with the sword, and a metallic clang rang out. The sword trembled and bent slightly. Bai Chen's sword fingers could not help but shrink back. In that instant, Chu Mu's eternal spirit sword straightened again, stabbing out a second time. Bai Chen quickly swung his sword and shifted his feet. He pointed with his sword fingers and quickly retreated. "You are worth me using 80% of my strength," Bai Chen said in a low voice. Bai Chen said in a low voice. He stopped retreating and suddenly charged forward, turning into a silver light. His speed was shockingly fast. To be able to burst out with such speed under the force field of Dragon Head Mountain was shocking. Third move, silver light thread. This was another move of the silver sword art. At this moment, Bai Chen used 80% of his strength, and his strength suddenly increased. The powerful aura immediately made Chu Mu feel pressured. The third move, silver light thread, pushed Bai Chen's speed to the extreme, exceeding Chu Mu's vision. It was as if time and space had been dislocated. Bai Chen's vision twisted and he was dazed. A silver light had already arrived, not showing any mercy. Fast, this sword was too fast. Chu Mu's intense sword work. His two swords moved, forming a cross. Rays of sword light poured out, forming a cross-shaped sword light defense, blocking Bai Chen's sword. Under the silver light thread, the sharpness was concentrated at one point. The cross-shaped sword light was completely destroyed. Finally, when it hit Chu Mu's two crossed swords, Chu Mu immediately felt an incomparably tyrannical power within that unceasingly attacked his two swords. Moreover, there was also an obscure sharpness that alternated between hard and soft as it attacked his body. The eternal sword intent suppressed and shattered the invading sword intent. Chu Mu's face flashed with a red light, and his chi and blood calmed down. 10,000 strands of silver light. The silver-white sword flashed, and silver light shot out, turning into 10,000 strands of light. It was the first move of the silver sword art. 10,000 strands of silver light surrounded Chu Mu from all directions, attacking him. Before Chu Mu could use his sword technique, the 10,000 strands of silver light instantly paused, as if they were frozen in the void. Suddenly, an incomparably sharp aura emerged from the void. Following that, the void seemed to collapse, quickly shrinking inwards, and a sword tip appeared. As the 10,000 strands of silver light condensed, it was extremely resplendent, attracting everyone's attention and making them gasp. The 10,000 strands of silver light seemed to be slowly rotating in an anti-clockwise direction, constantly converging inwards. As the sword tip appeared, the sword tip gradually condensed as well. An extremely terrifying aura suddenly spread out, and that aura pierced through the heavens and broke through the 9 levels of hell. Chu Mu's expression changed, and his pupils rapidly contracted. The sword tip that appeared instantly made him feel a great threat, and his hair stood on end. Below, the expressions of the 5 stars changed at the same time. The 10th move of the silver sword art. Bai Chen actually mastered the 10th move of the silver sword art. The silver sword art had a total of 12 moves. Among them, the power of the first move to the 9th move wasn't too different, but each had their own merits. Some were good at defense, some were good at speed, some were good at strength, and some were good at offense. But no matter what, although the first 9 moves were powerful, they were only the basic. The last 3 moves were the essence of the silver sword art. They were the true killing moves, the ultimate moves. As killing moves and ultimate moves, the last 3 moves were naturally harder to comprehend and cultivate. Speaking of which, the sword skills that they had inherited and cultivated were not inferior to the silver sword art. Although the moves were somewhat different, they still had the basic moves and killing moves. They were very clear about the difficulty of cultivating the killing moves and ultimate move. To put it simply, they had to wait until their cultivation had reached the initial stage of the 7th sky of the Wangu realm before they could start cultivating this inherited sword art. In other words, it had only been 4 to 5 years since they came into contact with the inherited sword art. In 4 to 5 years, Bai Chen had actually mastered the 10th move. Indeed, none of the star rank monsters were easy to deal with. He originally thought that he was better than the others, but now it seemed that it wasn't the case. The complete sword tip condensed, and a terrifying radiance was released. Chu Mu couldn't look straight at it, and it was extremely painful. What a powerful sword move! In the blink of an eye, 10,000 strands of silver light condensed in an instant, but it only condensed into the sword tip. Behind the sword tip, there were specks of silver light, like smoke lingering around. Silver-white aura surrounded Bai Chen's body, and the silver sword pierced out. The tip of the sword was instantly shrouded in silver smoke, and like a spark, it pierced towards Chu Mu. This sword wasn't very fast, but the terrifying radiance pierced through the void, and it made Chu Mu's hair stand on end, as if even his soul was about to be pierced. The silver sword art itself was a top inherited sword art, and the last 3 killing moves were already half a step away from the king rank. Once the 10th move was used, the sky changed colors, and the strange force field of Dragon Head Mountain was torn apart. Chu Mu had a feeling that if he couldn't block this sword, even if he didn't die, he would be severely injured and lose his battle strength. Under this sword, the surrounding void seemed to be locked down, and there was no way to dodge. Since he couldn't dodge, he would just smash it. Clouds and mist seeped out from the void, and silently spread out in all directions, spreading forward. This cloud and mist came so suddenly, so strangely, and so unexpectedly. In an instant, the silver sword tip dragged a long silver smoke as it pierced into the clouds. The clouds wrapped around the silver sword tip strand by strand, causing the silver sword tip's speed to decrease slightly. Chu Mu took this opportunity to attack. Chapter 1782. What is that? Where did that cloud come from? At the foot of Dragon Head Mountain, everyone was confused. That cloud had appeared silently and strangely. Within the clouds, a dazzling silver light was rapidly advancing. It was like a battleship riding the wind and breaking the wave. Everyone recognized that it was Bai Chen's sword. It was an incomparably powerful sword. Even though they were 999 zhang away, they could still feel that it was coming from the sky. That shocking sharpness was about to tear them apart. That silver light was even more dazzling. At this moment Chu Mu attacked. Without any sound, an extremely condensed sword light was faintly discernible within the cloud. With a shocking speed, it pierced through like a shooting star. Cloud-piercing sword style. The eternal sword intent, the true intent of the sword, the true intent of the stab, the true intent of the stab. Cloud-piercing sword style was the first sword style that Chu Mu had created. After using it time and time again, he had improved and perfected it. After comprehending the sword intent, it had been perfected even further, getting closer to perfection. It could be said that among Chu Mu's sword styles, the cloud-piercing sword style was the most perfect. The cloud-piercing sword style clashed with the silver sword art's 10th style. The sword body trembled, and the cloud-piercing sword style's power was instantly shaken, almost collapsing. Immediately, Chu Mu's second sword light arrived, and it was still the cloud-piercing sword style. Under the two consecutive cloud-piercing sword styles, the silver sword tip trembled, and cracks appeared. With the two cloud-piercing sword styles defeated, Chu Mu's two swords also trembled. The huge rebounding force made it impossible for him to instantly gather his power and attack again. The silver sword tip that was almost shattered, dragging a long silver flame tail, shot towards Chu Mu, directly piercing through Chu Mu. He was hit? Is he dead? No, he didn't. He dodged it. At the critical moment, Chu Mu used his sword Chi Shadow. The shadow was pierced through, but his real body was unharmed. The two swords soared through the air, and a resplendent cross slashed down like a mark of the void. This cross was not an ordinary cross. It was the Dao severing sword technique. The two Dao severing sword techniques crossed each other and slashed down. The power was shocking. Bai Chen felt as if the sky was about to collapse. He raised his head and saw a black mass. Even though he had only used 80% of his strength, Bai Chen still felt a great pressure, a pressure that could threaten his life. Unable to dodge, Bai Chen was struck. The cross-sword light instantly destroyed his body. In an instant, Bai Chen's body turned into silver light and was cut into 4 halves. They flowed like liquid and quickly gathered in another place. Silver body. He actually managed to cultivate an undying body. The legacy of the Silver King, when cultivated to a high level, would be the silver undying body. The reason why the Silver Mansion purchased the black iron root, the bronze root, and even the silver root was to extract the juice from it and use it for cultivation. The cultivation method was a series of cultivation methods: black iron body, bronze body, and even silver body. The cultivation of the black iron body required a large amount of black iron root juice. The cultivation of the bronze body naturally required a large amount of bronze root juice. The cultivation of the silver body required a large amount of silver root juice. As long as one was a disciple of the Silver Mansion, they were qualified to cultivate the black iron body. However, most of the disciples had to prepare the black iron root juice themselves. Only a few outstanding disciples could get the black iron root juice for free. Therefore, there were not many disciples who could cultivate the black iron body. As for the bronze body, it was even more difficult. Usually, only high-level saint experts were qualified to cultivate it. Moreover, there were only a few of them. As for the silver body, there were only a few people who cultivated it. There were less than 10 of them. Bai Chun was one of them. As the young master of the silver mansion, he had the qualification to cultivate it. The silver path could be both hard and soft. Therefore, the silver body could be both hard and soft. After cultivating the silver body to a certain level, one would be able to achieve the undying body. The undying body referred to the silver body. When it was hard, it could withstand powerful attacks. When it was soft, it could turn into liquid. It could not be killed. It could not be dispersed. It was very difficult to deal with. Of course, the undying body was relative. If one was strong enough, they could kill it. But no matter what, after cultivating the silver undying body, one's survivability would increase greatly. Naturally, their overall strength would increase as well. With a rumbling sound, the dragon head mountain seemed to tremble. An extremely powerful aura shot up from Bai Chen's body. Endless heaven and earth Yuan Qi was stirred up, whistling like a storm. 100% of his strength. Under 80% of his strength, Bai Chen could not suppress Chu Mu. He could not defeat Chu Mu, so he used 100% of his strength. Compared to 80%, 100% of his strength was much stronger in terms of aura. Executing the silver sword arts, 10,000 strands of silver light shone like stars, shooting out like meteors. The silver-white figure shuttled back and forth like a movie. Everything within 10 feet changed. As he waved the silver longsword in his hand, it immediately changed. 10,000 strands of silver light started to spin like stars. A sword tip appeared and slashed down from the sky like a crescent moon. Silver sword arts third style. Silver moon splitting sky. First, it was the 10,000 strands of silver light. Then, it was the silver moon splitting sky. The two different sword moves were smoothly connected by Bai Chen to attack Chu Mu. At this moment, Chu Mu had to endure the attacks of two powerful sword moves. Bai Chen's sword moves at 100% of his strength were several times stronger than when he was at 80%. The area within 10 feet was filled with dense silver light. 10,000 strands of silver light shot out like stars. The silver crescent moon slashed down from the sky. The terrifying sharpness made the hair on Chu Mu's neck stand up. Waving both swords, a black whirlpool condensed and spun. 6 paths sword-style defense. Immediately after, Chu Mu's two swords vibrated. The swords vibrated at a high speed and quickly attacked, turning into streaks of terrifying sword light. They were like shooting stars in the sky. It was like a meteor shower that streaked across the sky. Streaks of sharp and tyrannical light fell down. The sharp sword light that was like shooting stars instantly tore apart the silver light that covered 10 feet. Sword style, falling stars. That's right. This sword style was a new sword style that Chu Mu had created after he comprehended the true meaning of the sword and combined it with his own accumulation of sword art. He had comprehended the sword universe and the sword shadow in his mind. Falling stars sword style. This sword style was based on the true meaning of the sword and the true meaning of the stab. This was because the way this sword style attacked was to stab. In an instant there would be dozens or even hundreds of swords stabbing out. Each sword carried a strong might. When they were all stabbed out at the same time, it would be like a meteor shower streaking across the sky. Thus, it was named Falling Stars. Falling Stars sword style was also a stab, but it was different from the Piercing Cloud sword style. One was in one sword, while the other was in multiple swords. In terms of the power of a single sword, the Falling Stars sword style was naturally not as strong as the Piercing Cloud sword style. However, they both had their own uses. For example, at this moment, no matter how strong the piercing cloud sword style was, it was not suitable. The two sword light falling stars streaked across the sky like shooting stars, tearing apart the silver light. The streaks of light pierced through the stars and shot towards Bai Chen mercilessly. Under the sword light, the streaks of stars were all shattered and shot towards Bai Chen. Bai Chen shouted and a silver light appeared from his body. It was like he had turned into a silver general. Ding, 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 dang, dang, dang. The streaks of sword light landed on Bai Chen's body, giving off the sound of metal clashing. Silver body's unyielding strength was extremely powerful. Its defense was extremely shocking, and it forcibly resisted Chu Mu's Starfall sword-style attack. Of course, this was also because the might of each sword light of the falling star's sword style was scattered. If all the sword light of the falling star's sword style had gathered into one, Bai Chen would not dare to take it head-on. The silver crescent moon chopped down from the sky. Chu Mu raised his two swords and used the sword-style chopping dao, crossing it. Shao Chen executed sword chi image, and the afterimage shattered. As the sword light shot out, it turned into a beam of light and shot towards Bai Chen. Bai Chen's figure flashed and he also turned into a beam of silver light, charging at Chu Mu. In the blink of an eye, the two beams of light closed in on each other. The three spiritual swords started their attacks, each one taking a life. It was like thunder and lightning flashed across the sky. In the time it took for a spark to fly, both sides attacked dozens of times. Each exchange was extremely dangerous. If one was not careful, one would be injured. Bai Chen, who was at full power, moved at a shocking speed. The power contained in each sword strike was horrifying. When the two swords clashed, Chu Mu could feel the pressure. If not for Chu Mu's high attainments in deflecting force, he would not have been able to withstand many sword strikes and would have been knocked back. Even so, after clashing continuously, dozens of times, hundreds of times, thousands of times, Chu Mu gradually felt the pressure. With the difference of one heaven, Chu Mu's overall strength was still inferior to Bai Chen's. Under the absolute difference in strength, Bai Chen was a tyrannical star-grade demonic genius. He was even stronger than ordinary demonic geniuses. His sword techniques and sword intents were outstanding in all aspects. He was not much weaker than Chu Mu. With such a comprehensive strength, he was still slightly stronger than Chu Mu. After an intense battle, Chu Mu could confirm that his strength was stronger than ordinary low-tier 9-star saints. However, he was still weaker than ordinary middle-tier 9-star saint. He was only very close. As for Bai Chen's strength, he had truly reached the level of an ordinary middle-tier 9-star saint. There was still a gap between being close and reaching. Although the gap was not big, Shao Chen could still gradually gain the upper hand in the intense battle, gaining the advantage. However, most people couldn't see it. They only felt that the battle between the two parties was extremely intense. They couldn't see the figures of the two parties at all. They could only see two streams of flowing light and countless sword lights densely covering the surroundings. The Dragon Head Mountain, which was 999 feet tall, was full of terrifying sword chi. If an ordinary 8-star saint were to enter it, he would be killed in an instant. Only the 9-star saints and the 5 great stars would be able to see through the mystery. They could see that although the battle between Chu Mu and Bai Chen was extremely intense, Chu Mu was gradually being suppressed by Bai Chen. Chapter 1783. This isn't good. If Chu Mu doesn't have any other methods, I'm afraid he won't be able to hold on for long. He's already very powerful. You have to know that his cultivation is one level lower than Bai Chen's. Furthermore, it's the difference between a mid-level saint and an upper-level saint. If Chu Mu's cultivation is the same as Bai Chen's, then today's battle would be different. The 9-star saints discussed endlessly. However, they limited their voices to a certain range so that others couldn't hear them. The hearts of the 5 great stars trembled intensely. Originally, they thought that Chu Mu would be quickly defeated when Bai Chen used 80% of his strength. They didn't expect that not only would Chu Mu not be defeated, Chu Mu would even force Bai Chen to use 100% of his strength. As for the Bai Chen at full strength, the silver sword art's might was extremely terrifying, yet it was still unable to immediately defeat the opponent. As for the few sword techniques Chu Mu displayed, they were incomparably mysterious and powerful. They were unheard of. Looking at it now, although they were gradually suppressing Chu Mu in the intense battle, Chu Mu was extremely tenacious. He forcefully held on and wasn't defeated. From the looks of it, he could still hold on for a while. One had to know that Bai Chen's cultivation was one level higher than Chu Mu's. If both of their cultivations were the same, wouldn't the situation be reversed? If Chu Mu was able to defeat Bai Chen with the same cultivation, wouldn't that mean that Chu Mu's strength was above theirs? Thinking of that, they felt uncomfortable. The 6 great stars were above all the geniuses in the land of exile. Aside from themselves, no one could be compared to them. Even the 6 great stars of the previous generation were slightly weaker than them. Right now, there was actually someone who could compete with them. That was fine, but this person's cultivation wasn't as good as theirs. Once their cultivation was the same, his strength might even be above theirs. Who could accept that? In an instant, killing intent emerged in the hearts of these people. They wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to kill Chu Feng before he matured. Killing intent flashed for a moment before it disappeared. Killing someone out of jealousy was the worst way to do it. Only those who were useless would do that. A true genius would become stronger when facing a strong opponent. The killing intent disappeared and was replaced by determination and fighting spirit. In the past, the 6 stars were side by side, and it was difficult to distinguish between them. Therefore, they could not find any clear goals. They only knew how to cultivate and improve their strength, and that was all. Now they finally saw a goal. The clearer the goal, the more motivation they had. Now, they were looking forward to Chu Mu defeating Bai Chen or displaying strength that surpassed theirs. Only then could he be considered a true goal. Surpassing others was only temporary. Once they had a goal, they would have motivation. With motivation, they would be able to catch up and surpass again. This was a true genius, a true monster. On the top of Dragon's Head Mountain, the fierce battle was still going on. Chu Mu, if you don't use your trump card now, you'll definitely lose. Bai Chen shouted in a low voice. His aura was shocking, like rolling thunder. His aura soared, and the chi of heaven and earth surged like a tide. At this moment, Bai Chen had already reached the peak of his normal state, displaying a startling battle intent. Equip! With a low shout, an exquisite silver-white full-body armor suddenly appeared on Chu Mu's body. With the silver armor, Chu Mu's strength immediately multiplied. The multiplied strength made Chu Mu feel that the pressure from Bai Chen was not as obvious. When Xiao Qin drew his sword, he was faster and stronger. Good! Bai Chen's tone contained some joy. He could feel that after Chu Mu put on the armor, his aura and strength increased as well. This was one of Chu Mu's trump cards. With the silver armor, Chu Mu's strength increased further, approaching Bai Chen's. However, the current Bai Chen's aura was very strong. His strength reached the peak of his normal state. His sword techniques were ferocious and sharp as he attacked continuously. What could be more exciting than meeting a worthy opponent in a game of chess? When Xiao Qin used the silver light sword technique, countless silver lights shot out. Streaks of silver sword chi crisscrossed, covering a radius of hundreds of feet. However, when the sword chi reached a radius of 100 feet, it was distorted and scattered by the powerful force field of Dragon's Head Mountain. It was reflected and looked as bright and beautiful as silver fireworks. However, everyone knew that contained within that resplendent beauty was a fatal danger. The silver light sword technique was the sword technique that Bai Chen had cultivated before reaching the 7th sky of the Aeon. It was also an inherited sword technique. However, it could only be considered an ordinary inherited sword technique. It could not be compared to a peak inherited sword technique like the silver sword technique. However, Bai Chen had only cultivated the silver sword technique for 4 to 5 years, but he had cultivated the silver light sword technique for more than 10 years. He had completely grasped its essence. When the silver light sword technique was used, every move was split up in Bai Chen's sword. Half of the moves were combined to form a new sword move. However, it did not deviate from the essence of the silver light sword technique. It was even more mysterious and dazzling. Those mid-level saints couldn't look at it directly. It was too fast. They felt as if their eyes had been blinded. Even the 7-star saints felt that their eyes were sore and uncomfortable. Only the 8-star saints could barely look at it. Only the 9-star saints and the 5-star saints could open their eyes wide and see it clearly. The sword moves that Chu Mu had created belonged to the category of killing move. However, he could also use these sword moves in a battle. However, the energy consumption would increase. Therefore, Chu Mu extracted the essence of the sword moves and merged them into the basic sword technique. It evolved into a sword technique that was even stronger than the basic sword technique. Although the power was not as strong as the sword moves, the energy consumption was also much lower. Silver armor and dual swords. Chu Mu displayed his strength to his heart's content. Bai Chen's silver light sword technique would also incorporate the sword moves of the silver sword technique. Therefore, Chu Mu could only use the sword moves to fight against the silver sword technique. The 1st to 9th moves of the silver sword technique were continuously performed under the silver light sword technique. The 10th to 12th moves were the killing moves of the silver sword technique. It was not easy to perform them. Fight, fight, fight. On top of the 999-meter tall Dragon's Head mountain, under the cover of the powerful force field, every movement and every strike consumed several times more energy than usual. With their cultivation, they were unable to last for very long. From the start of the battle until now, both Bai Chen and Chu Mu had used more than half of their sword energies. They were left with less than half. Bai Chen did not pay attention to body cultivation. In other words, the Silver King bloodline did not have any body cultivation technique. Therefore, Bai Chen was not outstanding in terms of saint body. He had only reached the 4th level. The difference between the 4th and 5th level was still very obvious. Chu Mu's saint body was at the middle of the 5th level, which was much stronger than Bai Chen's. He had also grasped the technique of combining energy. He could perfectly combine the saint body's physical strength with the sword energy. 1 + 1 = 2, so the power he could display was even stronger. Therefore, Chu Mu's physical strength had also been used up by more than half. Both sides continued to attack and attack. After a few dozen breaths of time, more energy was consumed. Suddenly, Chu Mu and Bai Chen seemed to have a tacit understanding. They retracted their swords at the same time and retreated, increasing the distance between them. This battle was very satisfying. Bai Chen smiled. He was no longer as indifferent as before. "Let's fight it out," Chu Mu said. "I have the same intention." Bai Chen said, "Next, I will perform the 11th move of the silver sword art. I have just learned this move and am still unable to control it. I am also unable to control its power. Whether you live or die will depend on your ability." As soon as he finished speaking, monstrous killing intent surged from Bai Chen's body. The killing intent soared into the sky as if it had materialized. It instantly shattered the surrounding Yuan Qi whirlpools. The terrifying killing intent surged like a tide, sweeping out and covering all directions. Everyone at the foot of Dragon Head Mountain trembled as if they had fallen into an ice cellar. The bone-chilling coldness made them feel as if their bodies were frozen. Shock, horror, and shock. Their faces changed as they trembled. Even those 9-star saints felt danger and the shadow of death looming over them. The 11th move of the silver sword technique. The 5-star saints' faces changed at the same time. In the silver sword technique, the power of the last 3 moves increased in order. The 10th move was the weakest, the 12th move was the strongest, and the 11th move was in the middle. However, it was still very powerful. Unexpectedly, not only did Bai Chun learn the 10th move of the silver sword technique, but he also learned the 11th move. Although he hadn't mastered it yet, being able to use it meant that he had a certain level of attainment in the 11th move. Using a sword move that he hadn't mastered was quite a burden for Bai Chun. Under the monstrous killing intent, all of Bai Chun's power surged out. His skin turned silver white, as if he was a silver war reverend. Cold, chilling, and sharp, the killing intent crazily sliced through the air. Even the strange force field couldn't block it and was sliced apart. Chu Mu's heart trembled and his expression changed. Bai Chen's aura shocked him, and his expression turned serious. Whistling sounds kept ringing out. Under the tide-like killing intent, strands of yuan qi gathered and turned into a whirlpool again. With strands of killing intent, it started to spin crazily. The aura of thousands of soldiers and horses surged out. Strands of silver-white light streaked across the sky and intertwined in the surroundings, turning into a sea of silver light. Taking a deep breath, Chu Mu's aura surged. Rumbling sounds came from the sky. It was as if Bai Chen's actions had angered the heavens and earth. "I've created a sword move that I've never used before. Today I'll use you to test it." Chu Mu opened his mouth. His voice was originally low, but it became loud and clear. Together with the rumbling sounds of thunder, it was even more powerful. Following that, Chu Mu put away the blazing spiritual sword and held the eternal spiritual sword with both hands. Using his qi, he slowly raised the eternal spiritual sword. It was as if the eternal spiritual sword weighed millions of pounds. Every time it was raised, the air would shake and there would be a shocking sound. It was extremely powerful and had a shocking aura. This sword move is called Heaven's Might. Chapter 1784. In the sky, silver thunderbolts appeared like dragons, shuttling through the clouds. They were like thunderbolts tearing the sky apart, giving off a shocking roar. A terrifying aura descended from the sky, wanting to destroy everything. With a cracking sound, the silver thunderbolts struck down, as if they were tearing the sky apart. They shattered the spiritual qi vortexes and dissipated into nothingness. Only chaotic spiritual qi ripples spread out, rushing in all directions. The powerful aura that Bai Chun had prepared for his ultimate move was also disrupted by the sudden appearance of this aura. 2 completely different but equally terrifying auras were brewing, accumulating, waiting for the moment to erupt. In the realm of emptiness, Chu Mu had a unique grasp of everything around him. It was 10 times clearer than before, and all the spiritual qi ripples seemed to be within his grasp. After comprehending the sword intent, Chu Mu's comprehension of the sword universe sped up by several times, becoming clearer. He entered the realm of emptiness from time to time, using it to comprehend the sword universe and the sword shadow in his mind. The effect was better and the efficiency was higher. In that state, Chu Mu did not spend much time to comprehend and create the falling stars sword technique. Then, he created a new and more powerful sword technique, which he named Heaven's Might. Heaven's Might Sword Technique. Once the sword technique was executed, it was like Heaven's Might. What was Heaven's Might? Heaven's Might was the might of the heavens, the might of the heavenly way. Using one's own sword to imitate the might of the heavenly way, one had to admit that this sword technique was a stroke of genius. Of course, if it was Chu Mu himself, he would not have been able to create this move. The problem was that the sword shadow that he comprehended was the sky sword shadow that he had comprehended from the sky sword sage back then. The sky sword was the sword of the heavenly way, the ultimate treasure of the heavenly way sword sect in the antiquity age. The other sword shadows merged into the sky sword shadow, making it more solid and easier for Chu Mu to comprehend. Under various coincidences, Chu Mu comprehended an even more powerful sword technique, the Heaven's Might sword technique. Shao Chun held the eternal spiritual sword with both hands and raised it high. Strands of powerful energy gathered on the sword and shot up into the sky, resonating with the rumbling heavenly thunder. Since ancient times, heavenly thunder had been a representation of heaven's might. The wrath of the heavens caused thunder to rumble. A bright light emerged from the eternal spiritual sword and shot up into the sky. A huge vortex formed in the sky. Countless silver dragon-like thunderbolts swam within it, as if they were about to destroy the world. The wrath of the heavens and the might of the heavens were inviolable. Silver brilliance. Bai Chen's voice was deep, like the roar of an ancient war god. The silver light on his body flowed like waves and entered the silver sword in his hand. An indescribable brilliance shot out from the silver sword. It was incomparably resplendent. All of Bai Chen's aura was gathered in this sword. The 11th move of the silver sword technique, Silver World Illuminating Silver. It was even more resplendent and magnificent than the sun. He slashed out with his sword light. The pure and dazzling silver sword light tore through the sky at a terrifying speed. In the blink of an eye, it appeared in front of Chu Mu. That speed was indescribable. That sharpness was unprecedented. Heaven's might. Chu Mu's voice was heard. It was accompanied by the rumbling of thunder and the wrath of heaven. The eternal spiritual sword was raised and slashed forward in an instant. The rumbling sound suddenly exploded, deafening the ears of the people below Dragon's Head Mountain and causing their blood to boil. Heavenly thunder had always been a representation of heaven's way. The rumbling of heavenly thunder was like the wrath of heaven. If it was in the past, Chu Mu would have used the power of the law of lightning. However, after comprehending the sword intent, he walked on a different path. The power of heaven and earth was no longer of any help to him. However, Chu Mu could also replace the law of lightning. That was the true intent of Quake. The 8 trigrams and the 8 phases. The true intent of Quake could replace the law of lightning under certain circumstances. This sword was the heaven's might. The eternal sword intent, the true intent of sword, the true intent of slashing, and the true intent of trembling. This sword was an attempt by Chu Mu to merge the 3 true intents into one sword. He thought that if a few laws could be merged into one sword, causing the sword technique's power to be even stronger, then would the true intents be able to do the same? After comprehending and experimenting, he finally succeeded. It created this sword of his, the Heaven's Might sword style, the strongest sword. However, because it was not perfect, it needed some time to accumulate power and would consume a lot of his strength. One move to determine the victor. Bai Chen used the 11th move of the silver sword technique that he had yet to master. In order to not lose or even win, Chu Mu could only use the strongest Heaven's Might sword style. This was the clash of the strongest swords of both parties. The astonishing silver sword light tore through the sky and slashed down from above. The golden sword light that was filled with the majesty of the heavens slashed down from above. In an instant, the 2 sword lights collided. The world seemed to have sunk into black and white. The collision of gold and silver intertwined, instantly tearing apart the force field of Dragon Head Mountain and destroying it. The terrifying sword chi surged in all directions, cutting through the ground and leaving faint scratches on the Dragon Head Mountain. One must know that the Dragon's Head Mountain was made of pure copper essence. It was incomparably hard. An ordinary 9-star saint wouldn't be able to leave any mark on it. However, the sword moves from both sides could leave a mark on it. Although it was faint, it was enough to prove that these 2 moves were enough to threaten the life of an ordinary 9-star saint expert. Even an advanced 9-star saint expert wouldn't be able to deal with it calmly. In the silent world of black and white, everyone felt that everything in front of them seemed to have frozen, as if time and space were frozen. The reason for this feeling was that the power of the 2 sword techniques was too tyrannical. When they collided, it was mixed with the powerful force field of Dragon Head Mountain, resulting in this scene. It seemed like an eternity, but it was actually just a short moment. The black and white faded away, and a vast and indescribably sharp sound, like the sound of a tide that could destroy the world, or like a terrifying battleship flying through the sky, tearing apart the dome of heaven. Under the sharp roar, an extremely terrifying power exploded, attacking both sides. The silver light shattered, and the golden light shattered. A smear of blood red spread out, dissipated, and evaporated completely. Two figures flew out from the left and right, falling down the Dragon Head Mountain. Both sides are injured? The 5 great stars were stunned. That's right, the two figures that flew out at the same time were Chu Mu and Bai Chen. The collision of the strongest sword techniques caused a terrifying shockwave, which directly sent the two of them flying. The Dragon Head Mountain was only 100 feet in radius, and because the two of them had used their most tyrannical moves, they had almost exhausted all of their strength, and did not have much resistance. Their blood and chi surged, and their bodies were in pain. The terrifying impact made them see stars, and they were injured in an instant. Fortunately, the silver robe on Bai Chen's body had great power, and dissipated a part of the impact, so his body did not suffer any serious injuries. Chu Mu was equipped with the silver divine armor, which also had considerable defensive power. In addition to his tyrannical 5th-level saint body, he also resisted the impact, and did not suffer any serious injuries. The reason why they were sent flying was because they had used the powerful but incomplete sword technique, which caused them to exhaust all of their strength. They could not recover in time, and it was caused by a moment of emptiness. After the two of them fell for a few hundred meters, they adjusted themselves. With the remaining strength in their bodies, their feet landed on the Dragon Head Mountain's body, and they automatically used methods to dissipate as much of the impact as possible and finally slowly descended the mountain. After landing safely, the two of them heaved a sigh of relief. The situation at that time was very urgent. If it had been an ordinary mountain, with their abilities, they would have been fine. However, this was the Dragon Head Mountain, which was filled with a strange and powerful force field, which severely affected their movements. Therefore, if they had accidentally landed, it was very likely that they would have been seriously injured. Fortunately, they adjusted themselves in time, and had a high degree of control over their bodies, so they landed safely. After landing, the two of them looked at each other, and they appreciated each other. It was the appreciation of a match. "Brother Bai, you won this battle," Chu Mu said. He had used his silver god equipment and 2 swords, and in the end they had clashed head-on. It looked like they were on par, but he could feel that he was still a little lacking. Therefore, Chu Mu admitted defeat. It was not embarrassing to lose. Wanting to save face was going against one's nature. "No, this battle is a draw," Bai Chen said, shaking his head. Yes, in the last clash, Chu Mu's sword technique was indeed a little inferior. However, it was only a little, and it was not obvious. It was obvious that Bai Chen's cultivation was 1 sky layer lower than his, and it was the difference of 1 sky layer between a mid-level martial saint and a high-level martial saint. Even if he used a trump card, it was impossible to make up for the difference of 1 sky layer. Therefore, Bai Chen definitely did not think that he had won. In fact, if the two of them had continued to fight and used all their trump cards, Bai Chen might have been confident that he could kill Chu Mu, but he was not confident that he would not be injured. However, this was a competition, not a life-and-death battle. The situation was different, and they could not be compared. Since Bai Chen said that it was a draw, Chu Mu did not argue anymore. It did not matter if he won, lost, or even if it was a draw. In short, he had benefited a lot from this battle. "Brother Chu, I have benefited a lot from today's battle. 9 years later, I will enter the Black God's secret realm. When I come out of the Black God's secret realm, we will fight again to see who is better." Bai Chen's eyes flashed. His tone slowly turned apathetic as he spoke to Chu Mu, returning to his original state. After he finished speaking, Bai Chen turned around and quickly took out an exquisite silver shuttle. He entered the shuttle and quickly left. After Bai Chen left, the 5 stars looked at Chu Mu as if they wanted to see through Chu Mu. After today, your name will spread throughout the land of exile. Heiju laughed and turned into a black storm, quickly leaving. The 6 stars left one by one, and only Chu Mu was left on Dragon's Head Mountain. Under the gazes of countless people, Chu Mu quickly left Dragon's Head Mountain and recovered some of his strength. The Waning Moon Sword Saint, the Rock Sword Saint, and the others quickly rushed over to protect Chu Mu. Chu Mu took out his shuttle, and the 4 of them quickly entered it. Lin Biruo drove it, and they quickly left Dragon's Head Mountain, intending to return to Bloodbath City. After today's battle, Chu Mu had to spend some time to sort out his thoughts. Chapter 1785. Inside the flying shuttle, Chu Mu closed his eyes and meditated to recover his energy. He was also thinking about the battle between him and Bai Chen. The battle didn't last long, only a little more than 15 minutes. However, because they were at the peak of the Dragon's Head Mountain and were suppressed by the powerful force field, the consumption of energy was a few times higher than usual. Every move and every silver sword light intertwined in Chu Mu's mind. Bai Chen's sword skills were extremely high. He could be said to be the most profound opponent that Chu Mu had faced so far. His talent was only inferior to Chu Mu's. He was obviously better than Gu Luankong and the others. In the deep blue world, a genius like Bai Chen's talent would definitely be at the peak. Chu Mu had gained a lot from this battle. He was immersed in his memories. The Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint were still in shock. It was hard to imagine that the person that they were forced to protect was such a monstrous genius. One should know that his cultivation was only at the middle stage of the 6th sky of the ancient era. However, Bai Chen was at the middle stage of the 7th sky of the ancient era. There was a difference of 1 sky. This difference wasn't 1 sky for an ordinary cultivator. It was 1 sky for a monstrous genius. It was even more shocking. Under such circumstances, the 2 of them ended up in a draw. Didn't this mean that if Chu Mu's cultivation was the same as Bai Chen's, his strength would be above Bai Chen's? Thinking about this, the Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint's hearts couldn't help but beat wildly. Unbelievable! This is too unbelievable. It's a draw. It's a draw. Who is Chu Mu? How can he be so strong? No matter how strong he is, he's not a match for the Silver Sword Star. Didn't you hear that he admitted defeat? Ignorant. Chu Mu's cultivation is an entire sky layer lower than Bai Chen's. Even if he uses some trump cards, it's impossible to make up for the difference of an entire sky layer. The final result is indeed that Chu Mu is slightly inferior, but it's not that obvious. If Chu Mu's cultivation was the same as Bai Chen's, do you think Chu Mu would lose? This is a monster comparable to the 6 great stars. Since ancient times, who knows how many geniuses have wanted to become the 7th star, but no one has ever succeeded. Today we are fortunate enough to witness it. The 7th star. From now on, the 6 great stars will be renamed as the 7 great stars? Among the crowd, Zhou Jianming, Yu Kang, Ji Ying, and the others all looked somewhat unwilling. Who wouldn't want to become a 7th star cultivator? They had been working hard for that, but they hadn't been able to succeed. Today they saw with their own eyes a nobody, a cultivator who wasn't even as strong as them, fight against one of the 6 great stars, the Silver Sword Star, and the battle ended in a draw. Apart from the Star Realm monsters, who else in the same generation could do that? Now, someone had done it, and it was a middle-stage 6th sky of the Wangu realm. The bitterness in their hearts couldn't be described with words. Zhao Wuji clenched his fists and stared at the Dragon's Head Mountain, his eyes sharp. Originally, he thought that his strength and talent were comparable to the 6 great stars, but after exchanging glances with Tu Qianjun, he knew that there was still a gap between him and the 6 great stars. Therefore, he thought that other than himself, no one would have a better chance of becoming the 7th star than him. Unexpectedly, the truth was completely out of his expectations. There was someone who was more talented than him, stronger than him, and whose cultivation was lower than his. The seventh star. What a resounding title, what a great honor! It was the lifelong pursuit of the true geniuses in the land of exile, but it was snatched away by an unknown person. Yes, no one doubted that after today's battle, Chu Mu wouldn't be crowned as the seventh star. It was too obvious. Under the eyes of countless people, the battle had been spectacular and earth-shattering. No matter how unwilling he was in his heart, Zhao Wuji had to admit that Chu Mu did indeed have the qualifications to be called the ruler of the seventh star. The 6 great stars have their own titles. How should we name Chu Mu's seventh star? Dual swords, unfathomable sword skills, unparalleled, unparalleled. Why don't we name it unparalleled? Unparalleled sword star. Unparalleled? Isn't that too much? However, his cultivation is only at the middle stage 6th sky of the Wangu realm. I think that if his cultivation is the same as the 6 great stars, his strength will definitely surpass the 6 great stars. He deserves the title unparalleled. Not everyone had the right to be given a name. In the land of exile, there was no lack of a group of highly respected people. To put it bluntly, they were the older 9-star saint-level experts. The strength of these experts was usually at the pinnacle of the 9-star saint level, and they had quite a bit of prestige in the land of exile. When Chu Mu and Bai Chen fought on the Dragon's Head Mountain, there were several peak 9-star saint experts among the spectators. Seeing was believing, and hearing was false. After a round of debate, the title unparalleled was crowned on Chu Mu's head. The 7th star. Unparalleled sword star. Soon, the news of Chu Mu's 7th star, unparalleled sword star, spread throughout the land of exile. Other than those who were in seclusion, almost everyone knew about it. When the name of the unparalleled sword star spread throughout the land of exile, a new star seemed to rise in the sky of the land of exile. It hung in the sky, faintly discernible, and emitted a weak but tenacious luster. In the city of silver, the Silver Mansion. When the Silver King heard the news, he immediately revealed a smile. The 7th star. After so many years, someone has finally reached it. Unparalleled sword star, Chu Mu. Let's see if the title unparalleled lives up to its name. Like the Silver King, when the other 6 kings heard the news, they were also surprised. Immediately, there was an unfathomable feeling. Since the 7 kings knew about the news, the 6 stars naturally knew about it as well. Unparalleled sword star, hee. You actually named yourself unparalleled. Do you really think you're unique? Heiju chuckled, his eyes deep and dark. I'll wait. When your cultivation increases, I'll let you know the difference between us. Although he said that, Heiju had seen the battle between Chu Mu and Bai Chen with his own eyes. Although Chu Mu was slightly inferior, he knew that it was brought about by the difference in cultivation. If their cultivation was the same, would Chu Mu be inferior to Bai Chen? And his strength was actually similar to Bai Chen's. Therefore, if he wanted to defeat Chu Mu with the same cultivation, it wouldn't be easy. However, what was there to be afraid of? With such a goal, wouldn't it be better? Heiju thought so. Tu Qianjun also thought so. Long Shi, Yan Qingya, Feng Feisha, and the others also had similar thoughts. They had their own pride. They didn't allow themselves to use their cultivation to suppress their opponent. They would rather have their opponent's cultivation be higher than theirs. This kind of pride supported their continuous improvement, and unceasingly unearthing their own potential. After the battle between Chu Mu and Bai Chen, the 6 stars returned. When they heard the news that Chu Mu had become the unparalleled sword star, they immediately went into seclusion, trying their best to increase their strength. Outside Bloodbath City, the bright yellow flying shuttle stopped. Chu Mu and the other 3 walked out of the shuttle. Chu Mu's strength had completely recovered. During the time in the shuttle, he constantly recalled the battle with Bai Chen. Bit by bit, various comprehensions gradually appeared, absorbed, and mastered. Bai Chen had used 3 different sword techniques: basic sword techniques, silver light sword technique, and silver sword art. Bai Chen's basic sword techniques were also very profound and solid. Once the silver light sword technique was used, silver light filled the sky. The silver sword light seemed to be everywhere. The terrifying silver sword light was incomparably sharp. It could be both hard and soft. Every move of the silver sword art was shockingly powerful. That kind of sharpness was earth-shattering. During the battle, every breath was extremely dangerous. The slightest carelessness would cause one to be hit by the opponent's sword and fall into danger. What the danger brought was naturally more personal experience and comprehension. The cloud-piercing sword style and the other sword styles, the starfall sword style, and the heavenly might sword style all gave Chu Mu a new experience. The 4 of them, led by Chu Mu, walked through the gate of Bloodbath City. Chu Mu immediately realized that the gazes of others towards him were different from before. "Look, that's the unparalleled sword star, Chu Mu. The 7th star that fought to a draw with the silver sword star, unparalleled sword star, Chu Mu. I saw him in person. As expected, he has an imposing appearance and an extraordinary aura." All sorts of discussions entered the ears of Chu Mu and the other 3. Wherever Chu Mu walked, the crowd would take the initiative to make way for him, as if they were welcoming the return of the king. Seeing this scene, Chu Mu came to a realization. He understood that the fight between him and Bai Chen had already spread throughout the land of exile while they were on the flying shuttle. Many people knew about it. He could also hear that he was given the title of the 7th star, and was even called the unparalleled sword star. Bloodbath sword star, Black Demon sword star, Dragon slaying sword star, Green fiend sword star, Silver sword star, and Flowing light sword star. The original 6 stars had become 7 stars with the addition of the unparalleled sword star. Unparalleled, unparalleled, unparalleled. Chu Mu could not help but smile in his heart. However, he did not care about the 7th star or the unparalleled sword star. Strength was the most important. Xiao Chen's greatest gain from the battle with Bai Chen was his comprehension, nothing else. However, the waning moon sword saint, the boulder sword saint, and the little maid Lin Biruo had different thoughts from Chu Mu. Chu Mu was publicly recognized as the 7th star, the unparalleled sword star. They felt a sense of glory that they shared. Their young master was the 7th star that was on par with the 6 stars. He was the unparalleled sword star. The servant was the master of glory. This was the truth. Along the way to the manor, Lin Biruo, the waning moon sword saint, and the boulder sword saint's mouths did not close. They were too happy, too excited, too emotional. This feeling was as if they had become the 7th star, the unparalleled sword star. Chapter 1786. After returning to the manor, Chu Mu did not go out. Every day, he cultivated as usual. He was not affected by the fame of the unparalleled sword star. He did what he was supposed to do. There are less than 9 years before the opening of the Black God's secret land. When he was not cultivating, Chu Mu would take out the jade token he had obtained from the auction to check. This was a jade token made by the 5 Castellan manors. It had no other purpose other than to determine the number of people who had entered the Black God's secret land. If it was lost or destroyed, one would lose the right to enter the Black God's secret land. There were many theories about what the Black God's secret land was. None of them were convincing enough. However, one thing was for sure. The Black God's secret land was the best place to increase one's strength. Anyone who did not die after entering the Black God's secret land would have their strength increased significantly after leaving. Many people agreed with this statement. Therefore, Chu Mu was even more curious about entering the Black God's secret realm. It would be great if I could get an extra slot, Chu Mu thought to himself. He planned to let Lin Biruo enter the Black God's secret land to increase her strength. However, a slot was very precious. It was not easy to get one. Chu Mu could only give up on this idea. Every day, he practiced, comprehended, and perfected his sword. Days passed. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. Long Yunkong came out of seclusion. When he heard the news, he was shocked and rushed to the manor. "Brother Chu, I did not expect to miss such an exciting battle while I was in seclusion," Long Yunkong exclaimed with a smile. "Brother Long, your cultivation base has increased a little. Your strength must have increased by a lot." Chu Mu saw Long Yunkong's cultivation base at first glance. It had increased from the early 7th sky of Wangu to the middle 7th sky of Wangu. For ordinary cultivators, a small increase in strength would not be obvious. However, for geniuses, a small increase in strength would be obvious. "No matter how much I have improved, I can't compare to you, Brother Chu." Long Yunkong sighed. Originally, he had worked hard to cultivate because he didn't want to fall behind Chu Mu too much. Unknowingly, he had already set Chu Mu as a goal. However, to his surprise, although he had made a breakthrough in his cultivation and increased his strength, the gap between him and Chu Mu had widened instead. The 7th star, unparalleled sword star. This title represented one's strength. After chatting for a while, Long Yunkong brought up the idea of sparring with Chu Mu. Of course, Chu Mu didn't refuse. Sparring was mainly about swordsmanship. Long Yunkong's swordsmanship was indeed not bad, but there was a clear gap between him and Bai Chen. This sparring was almost equivalent to Chu Mu teaching Long Yunkong swordsmanship. "Thank you, Brother Chu." Long Yunkong put away his sword and saluted Chu Mu with 3 swords. Chu Mu accepted it calmly. "I plan to stay here for a while. Is it inconvenient for you?" Long Yunkong said again. "Brother Long, this manor originally belonged to you. There's no need to bother," Chu Mu said with a smile. Long Yunkong stayed for the time being. His purpose was very simple. He wanted to ask Chu Mu to teach him swordsmanship. A few days later, an uninvited guest came. This person had barged into the manor without any prior notice. Seeing Chu Mu practicing his sword, he didn't say anything further. His footsteps suddenly sped up, and his body transformed into an aurora. He pulled out his sword, and a dazzling sword light flashed. It was like an aurora streaking across the sky. It was compatible with his movement technique. Sword and body combined, and the power of this move was displayed to the extreme. The moment the uninvited guest entered the manor, Chu Mu sensed it. While practicing his swordsmanship, he had a unique grasp of the surroundings. The movements of the entire manor were under his control. "Who is it?" The Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint were sparring on the side when they sensed the arrival of an uninvited guest. As soon as they saw the swift aurora sword radiance, their expressions changed and they let out a low roar. The two of them switched from sparring to facing the enemy together and stabbed out with their swords at the same time. A waning moon rose. The moonlight shone brightly. The sword light was as steady as a rock. 2 swords and 2 moves attacked the uninvited guest at the same time. However, the uninvited guest merged with his sword and was extremely fast. Like an aurora, he flew through the air. The aurora-like sword light twisted slightly and broke free of the Waning Moon Sword Saint and Monolith Sword Saint's pursuit. He was even faster as he stabbed towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu's pupils contracted slightly. A wisp of aurora-like light was reflected in his eyes. He shook his right hand slightly. The Roaring Glory spiritual sword trembled and the sword light spread out. He swung the Roaring Glory spiritual sword like a long whip. The golden-red sword light immediately slashed out. With a whistling sound, it was like a dragon swinging its tail, shattering the void. In an instant, the 2 sword light collided. The aurora-like sword light was instantly shattered by Chu Mu's swing of his sword. The uninvited guest's figure was revealed. It was a black-robed young man. The black-robed young man's eyes flashed. When the sword light was shattered, his expression changed. He shouted in a low voice and a strong aura gushed out. He waved his sword in an instant. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In an instant, 18 sword lights were extremely fast. 18 aurora-like sword light intertwined and slashed, cutting the void in front of him into countless pieces. This move was enough to threaten an ordinary 9-star saint-level expert. Chu Mu's sword light changed its trajectory. It went from an arc to a straight stab. When the sword stabbed out, it seemed to pierce through the clouds and the moon. It was just a stab, but it was like 1,000 or 10,000 swords. It hit the intersection of the 18 aurora-like sword light. The strong 18 aurora-like sword light was immediately broken by Chu Mu's sword. A sword light passed by like a thunderbolt and arrived in an instant. Before the black-robed young man could perform a new sword technique, Chu Mu's sword had already stabbed toward his face. A cold light flashed in front of his eyes. It was like a cold star shining, filling the world in front of his eyes. In great shock, the black-robed young man burst out with all his strength. His strong aura soared into the sky. The sword in his hand burst out an amazing light. In the sharp slashes, a defensive wall of light was formed in front of him. The wall of light was strong. The aurora-like ripples intertwined and attacked. It instantly blocked Chu Mu's stab. Chu Mu's wrist trembled slightly. His strength exploded layer by layer. His sword pierced through the aurora-like sword wall, tearing it apart and piercing through it. The sword touched the black-robed young man's horizontal sword. The strong impact of the sword made the black-robed young man tremble and fly backward. He felt pain in his muscles and bones, as if they were about to fall apart. He couldn't control his chi and blood, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He landed dozens of meters away and staggered back dozens of meters before he could regain his balance. The waning moon sword saint and the rock sword saint attacked and surrounded him. "Stop!" the black-robed young man shouted. "I mean no harm." But the waning moon sword saint and the rock sword saint wouldn't listen to him. They attacked from left and right. Although they didn't want to kill him, they would still be injured if they were hit. "Stop!" Chu Mu's indifferent voice sounded. The waning moon sword saint and the rock sword saint stopped their attacks at the same time. They stopped less than an inch away from the black-robed young man. The cold sword will attacked, and the black-robed young man's expression changed. He had almost died here. He couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. The reason why Chu Mu called for them to stop was because the black-robed young man didn't show any killing intent from the beginning to the end. The famous Aurora Sword Saint. "What do you want from me?" Chu Mu asked again. He pointed out the other party's identity with one sentence. The waning moon sword saint and the rock sword saint looked at the black-robed young man with sudden realization. So this was the Aurora Sword Saint who had been in the limelight recently. They cultivated in the manor, but it didn't mean that they didn't know what was going on outside. Therefore, they knew about the bigger news in the outside world. The Aurora Sword Saint was a very famous person in the past half a year. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere. He first defeated Zhou Jianming, then Yu Kang, and then Ji Ying. Zhou Jianming, Yu Kang, and Ji Ying were the top 3 geniuses in the first array. It was naturally big news that they had been defeated consecutively. The Aurora Sword Saint, Zhao Wuji, was also famous because of this. Zhao Wuji had a mysterious background. His cultivation had reached the late stage of the 7th sky of Aeon, but his strength was not inferior to an ordinary 9-star saint. The sword technique he used was called the Aurora Sword Technique. The sword was as swift as the aurora, and the power was condensed. The penetrating power was shocking. Therefore, he was called the Aurora Sword Saint. Because he had defeated Zhou Jianming, Yu Kang, and Ji Ying, the Aurora Sword Saint, Zhao Wuji was regarded as the #1 person below the 7 stars. Half a year ago, Zhao Wuji had watched the battle between Chu Mu and Bai Chen on Dragon Head Mountain. He had been greatly inspired. For the past half a year, he had been constantly challenging people to improve his sword technique. After increasing his strength, he had the idea of challenging Chu Mu. Therefore, He had come to blood-slaughtering city to find Chu Mu. He felt that even if he wasn't a match for Chu Mu, the difference wouldn't be too big. However, he hadn't expected to be defeated by Chu Mu in just a few moves. Chu Mu's cultivation was only at the peak of the mid-stage of the sixth sky of Aeon. He hadn't even reached the late stage of the sixth sky of Aeon. Zhao Wuji didn't know until they had fought. Once they had fought, Zhao Wuji realized that there was a huge gap between his strength and a star realm monstrous genius like Chu Mu. If the battle with Chu Mu was like this, there was no need to talk about the battle with the other 6 stars. After all, although Chu Mu's talent was strong, his cultivation was still inferior to the first sky of the 6 stars. Zhao Wuji's simple explanation was accepted by the crowd. "Brother Chu, I took the liberty to make a move. Please don't take offense." After Zhao Wuji explained, he cupped his fists. He was arrogant, but Chu Mu's talent and strength were above his. Therefore, he didn't feel that he had anything to be proud of in front of Chu Mu. "It's just a spar. There's nothing to be surprised about." Chu Mu smiled. "I was too arrogant. I thought that my strength was enough to challenge Brother Chu. I didn't expect that there was still a huge gap between us." Zhao Wuji shook his head and sighed. "Brother Chu, in a few years, I will also enter the Black God's secret realm. Right now, I need to go back and cultivate in seclusion to increase my strength. When the time comes, I will definitely challenge you again. Please accept this bottle of pills as an apology for offending Brother Chu." After saying that, Zhao Wuji threw a jade bottle at Chu Mu. He turned around and walked out of the manor. Chapter 1787. Chu Mu did not deliberately hide the news, nor did he deliberately spread the news. Therefore, the news that Aurora swordsman Zhao Wuji had been defeated by the unparalleled sword star Chu Mu's sword spread quickly. "I knew it. How can the Aurora swordsman be compared to the 7 stars?" In the past half a year, the Aurora swordsman Zhao Wuji had been in the limelight. His powerful strength had the potential to be hailed as the 8th star. Now, this momentum had been broken by the unparalleled sword star Chu Mu. Zhao Wuji's defeat once again made people realize the strength of the 7 stars. After that, people came to challenge Chu Mu every few days. The thoughts of the challengers were simple. If they could not defeat Chu Mu, it would be equivalent to receiving guidance. If they were lucky enough to win a move or two, it would be enough to make their reputation spread far and wide. At the beginning, Chu Mu was rather willing. After all, those who dared to challenge him could be considered first-rate geniuses, allowing him to verify his sword technique. However, as the number of people increased, Chu Mu didn't like it. Geniuses were divided into high and low rank. Dragons and snakes mixed together. Sometimes it was a complete waste of time. Therefore, anyone who came to challenge him would be received by the Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint. Only those who could defeat the Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint together were qualified to be dealt with by him personally. In this way, Chu Mu was not disturbed anymore. It could not be helped. The Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint were both veteran experts at the peak of the 8-star saint level. They were powerful and had a solid foundation. Ordinary cultivators could not be compared to them. In addition, they had followed Chu Mu for a period of time. Their swordsmanship had improved significantly, and their strength had also increased. Not to mention the 2 of them working together, just one of them was enough to stop many challengers. Perhaps there were some geniuses who could defeat the Waning Moon Sword Saint or the Rock Sword Saint, but they could not defeat the 2 of them together. Naturally, Chu Mu would not be able to deal with them personally. Geniuses who could defeat the Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint together were very powerful. They were barely qualified to be dealt with by Chu Mu personally. However, in the past few years, there had not been a single challenger like this. Chu Mu was also safe and sound. The Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Rock Sword Saint would occasionally receive guidance from Chu Mu. After a few years, their swordsmanship had improved a little. The 2 of them were now dead set on submitting to Chu Mu. It didn't matter if they swore an oath or not. Once the oath was up, they probably wouldn't be willing to leave. What a joke. Once he left, he wouldn't be able to receive such guidance. This was an opportunity. However, they did not know that in less than 100 years, Chu-mu would leave. In the blink of an eye, 5 years had passed since the battle between Chu-mu and Bai-chun. For the past 5 years, Chu-mu had been cultivating in the manor. With the dragon swallowing jade pendant, he didn't need to take the initiative to cultivate the divine wilderness sword art. Therefore, he used the time to practice his swordsmanship. In the past 5 years, Chu-mu's cultivation had broken through from the mid-stage of the 6th sky of Wangu to the late stage of the 6th sky of Wangu. He was only a step away from the peak. Chu-mu was confident that he would be able to reach the peak of the 6th sky of Wangu within half a year. After stabilizing his cultivation, he would be able to break through to the 7th sky of Wangu. Once his cultivation reached the 7th sky of Wangu, he would be even more powerful. On one hand, his understanding of the sword universe had deepened. His understanding of the sword shadow had deepened. His various sword moves had improved, especially the Heaven's Might sword style. It was much more refined than 5 years ago. It was easier to use and its power was more concentrated. Chu-mu had improved. The Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Monolithic Sword Saint had also improved. Lin Biruo's cultivation had also improved. She had reached the early stage of the 6th sky of Wangu. Back then, Zhao Wuji had left behind a bottle of pills to help with cultivation. However, it wasn't useful to Chu-mu. Therefore, he had given it to Lin Biruo. It allowed her to cultivate faster and reach the early stage of the 6th sky of Wangu in just a few years. At the same time, she had also mastered the last 3 moves of the Clearwater Sky sword art. 5 years had passed. The opening of the Black God's secret land was getting closer and closer. In the past 5 years, there were fewer and fewer people who wanted to challenge Chu-mu. Especially in the past year, there was not a single challenger. As for the outside world, there was a storm brewing. There seemed to be a trend of challenging people. Geniuses were challenging people everywhere to sharpen their swordsmanship. In a short period of time, more and more geniuses appeared. There were also people who fought and killed in order to obtain a spot to enter the Black God's secret land. It could be said that the past few years had been eventful. However, all of this had nothing to do with Chu-mu for now. Today, he was teaching Lin Biruo sword skills in the manor. Lin Biruo's cultivation base had reached the early stage of the 6th sky of Wangu. She had also mastered the Clearwater Sky sword art to the pinnacle. If she wanted to improve her strength, other than improving her cultivation base, she had to learn more powerful sword skills and secret technique. It wasn't easy to improve one's cultivation base. Chu-mu felt that he had to teach Lin Biruo more powerful sword skills. There were thousands of sword skills in the forest of 1,000 sword steels of the True God sword sect. At the very least, they were at the level of inheritances in the land of exile. Any one of them could cause countless people to kill each other. The sword skill that you cultivate belongs to the Gentle Water series. Therefore, the sword skill that I'm going to teach you belongs to the Gentle Water series as well. It's called the Rippling Sword, also known as the 8 Rippling Sword Art. Chu-mu said seriously. Young master, I will do my best to learn it. Lin Biruo said seriously. Watch carefully. Chu-mu said and unsheathed his sword. He performed the 8 Rippling Sword Arts move by move. The first time, Lin Biruo couldn't understand it at all. It was like a primary school student reading a textbook. The second time, Chu-mu slowed down. The third time was even slower, but Lin Biruo still couldn't understand it. She could only see ripples spreading out from Chu-mu's sword light. Those ripples were formed by the sword light. Chu-mu didn't use any strength. He just unsheathed his sword. However, the ripples of sword light made Lin Biruo feel a fatal danger. On the 4th time, Chu-mu started to show Lin Biruo the move. On the 5th time, he started to explain. Lin Biruo could be considered to have some talent in swordsmanship. In the past few years, she had been influenced by what she saw and heard. Therefore, under Chu Mu's careful guidance, she began to understand a little of the 8 rippling sword arts after 10 days. It wasn't easy to cultivate an inherited level sword skill. Even for a monster like Bai Chen, it took him more than 10 days to learn the basics of the silver light sword art. Lin Biruo's talent was far inferior to Bai Chen's. It wasn't surprising that she took more time. To Chu Mu, the 8 rippling sword arts wasn't a profound sword skill. However, in order to not bring any trouble to Lin Biruo, there was no third person present when he taught. Today, Chu Mu explained the main points of the 8 rippling sword arts to Lin Biruo again. As he spoke, Chu Mu's eyes suddenly shot out a sharp light. It was as sharp as sword light piercing through the void. He executed the 8th move of the 8 rippling sword arts, rippling destruction. The ripple-like sword light overlapped and finally gathered into one. Then, it turned into a beam of sword light. It was incomparably sharp and penetrated the void. Shortly after, a door seemed to open in the void, a mysterious and unfathomable door that caused the rippling sword light to dissipate into nothingness. A figure seemed to have traversed time and space to arrive. An incomparably mysterious sword light shot out. It seemed sharp, domineering, cold, flexible, powerless, and slow. This sword contained countless mysteries. The mysteries circulated and changed unpredictably. With just a glance, Chu Mu knew that his opponent's sword skill was mysterious and unfathomable. It had already reached a very profound level. It was much more superior than Bai Chen's. Of course, in terms of sword skill, Chu Mu was better than his opponent. However, in terms of sword skill application and other aspects, this sword had already reached a shocking level. Mysterious and unfathomable. Chu Mu also attacked with his sword. His sword had many transformations, but it was different from his opponent's. In an instant, the two swords didn't collide. However, they continuously changed hundreds of times. They were both looking for the opponent's weakness. Once they found a weakness, they would immediately attack. Lin Biruo couldn't understand a battle of this level. She only felt that the sword light was flashing in front of her. She was dazzled and her face was blank. It couldn't be helped. The difference between their levels was too great. Chu Mu couldn't see the face of the figure that appeared in the void. He could only see his opponent's sword. Being able to see the sword was enough. The interesting thing was that his opponent didn't use much strength after he appeared in the void. He purely used his mysterious sword skill to target Chu Mu. Since that was the case, Chu Mu also didn't use his cultivation. He also used his sword skill to fight. The battle of sword skills didn't seem that grand and destructive. However, each move was profound and shocking. It was very dangerous. In the blink of an eye, both sides had already attacked dozens of times. They were all moves of basic sword skills. However, Chu Mu's basic sword skill was obviously different from his opponent's. Mysterious. The opponent's sword skill gave Chu Mu a mysterious feeling. It was a feeling that couldn't be described with words. It seemed fast and slow. It seemed strong and weak. It seemed sharp and blunt. It was very mysterious. The sword was clearly stabbing towards Chu Mu. It arrived in an instant, but it didn't seem to be stabbing. It was as if the sword was being pulled back. The sword was being pulled back, but it was actually stabbing towards Chu Mu. This feeling was very strange. It interfered with Chu Mu's judgment. Chu Mu could see that this kind of basic sword skill was no longer a simple basic sword skill. It involved other applications. It was another field, another level of application. It was a field that Chu Mu didn't know. To have such attainments in sword skills, he was definitely not an ordinary person. Even the 6 stars couldn't compare to him. Under the sword battle, Chu Mu was focused. He used his sword intent to analyze the signs and trajectory of his opponent's sword. He displayed his sword skills to his heart's content. In the blink of an eye, dozens of breaths passed. The battle between the two was limited to a small area. It didn't exceed a range of 3 meters. Lin Biruo was dumbfounded. She couldn't understand at all. As she watched, she started to feel dizzy and uncomfortable. She didn't dare to continue watching. Chapter 1788. Lin Biruo's reaction was normal. Her cultivation was not high enough, her primordial spirit was not strong enough, and her spiritual power was not strong enough. Most importantly, her attainments in swordsmanship were not profound enough. Therefore, if she watched too much, she would be dazzled and her spiritual power would be affected, making it very unstable. If a person with enough attainments in swordsmanship and a primordial spirit watched it, he would gain something. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu and the mysterious man had been fighting for a quarter of an hour. Every move was dangerous. Countless changes were performed under the sword. The more they fought, the more Chu Mu could feel the mystery in the mysterious man's swordsmanship. However, this mystery made Chu Mu feel like rootless duckweed, which was hard to grasp. After fighting for a quarter of an hour, Chu Mu could not grasp the surface of the mysterious man's swordsmanship. The more it was so, the more awe-inspiring and excited he was. Chu Mu could not be more satisfied to fight with an expert, especially with such swordsmanship. He abandoned all distracting thoughts and wholeheartedly devoted himself to the battle with the mysterious man. In the blink of an eye, another quarter of an hour passed. Chu Mu had to use his 2 swords to be on par with the mysterious man. The battle within 3 meters was completely filled with sword light. It was so dense that it seemed to form a ball of sword light. Even if the waning moon sword sage were here, he would not be able to see anything. The thrilling and mysterious battle continued for another half an hour. Chu Mu was completely engrossed in the battle. The potential he had accumulated over the past few years of cultivation was constantly transformed into strength by him during the battle. His swordsmanship became more and more exquisite. Suddenly, the 2 swords missed. Chu Mu suddenly came to his senses. It turned out that the mysterious man had retreated from his 2 swords. This calmness showed that the mysterious man's strength was definitely above his. Waving his 2 swords, Chu Mu looked straight ahead and said, "Your Excellency, are you alone?" "Chu Mu, your attainments in swordsmanship are indeed amazing. My help back then was not in vain." The mysterious man's figure seemed to be in the gap between time and space. Chu Mu could see him, but he could not see his face clearly. He could only see a figure. "Help me once?" Chu Mu was startled, and his mind raced. The other party had said that he would help him once, which meant that it would be after he entered the land of exile. Thinking back, Chu Mu suddenly understood where he might have received help from others. It seemed that other than the time when he was chased by Jing Taijun and the melting snow sword saint of the Iron Wing camp, there was no other help. Back then, Jing Taijun and the melted snow sword saint were many times stronger than him. They were strong enough to kill him, but they strangely retreated. It turned out that it was this person's doing. "Thank you, Senior." Chu Mu bowed. "No need to be so courteous." The person laughed. His figure seemed to have appeared from the space-time crack and gradually became clearer. It was a middle-aged man wearing a black robe. He looked like a scholar, but he also had the elegance that scholars didn't have. He had a carefree temperament. This unique temperament was extremely conspicuous. If Chu Mu had seen him before, he would definitely have recognized him. Therefore, he was certain that he had never seen this person before. Combining the other party's temperament and his sword technique, Chu Mu's heart trembled. A respectful title flashed through his mind. "Senior, are you King Xuanmiao?" Chu Mu's tone was somewhat serious. King Xuanmiao was one of the 7 kings of the land of exile. He was an absolute existence that stood at the peak of the land of exile. It was certain that the 7 kings were absolute experts. As for what level they belonged to among the absolute experts, Chu Mu did not know. After all, the absolute experts were a domain that Chu Mu was still unable to reach. It was a powerful domain. He had no idea how the absolute experts were divided into strong and weak. However, even the weakest absolute expert was far stronger than the current him by God knows how many times. The two of them were not on the same level at all. What do you mean? The other party was a little surprised, but he did not deny it. A feeling. Chu Mu smiled. Even in the face of an absolute expert, Chu Mu would not lose his composure. However, this person had once helped him and saved him the chance to use by Ling. Chu Mu was still grateful to him. A good feeling. The other party smiled. This was equivalent to admitting his identity. Shortly after, he looked deeply at Chu Mu and spoke again. Chu Mu, in the land of exile, there are 7 kings and 6 stars. No, there are 7 stars now. In the future, the original 6 stars will inherit the title of king. However, King Xuanmiao has never accepted a disciple. It's not that he doesn't want to, it's just that he doesn't have a suitable candidate. Senior, thank you for your kind intentions. However, I will not stay in the land of exile, Chu Mu said. Although King Xuanmiao's words were only half spoken, Chu Mu could already understand the meaning behind his word. He wanted to accept him as a disciple and give him the title of King Xuanmiao in the end. However, Chu Mu's ambition was not in the land of exile. This was the first reason. In the end, King Xuanmiao was only an absolute expert. No matter how strong he was only an absolute expert. That was all. It wasn't that Chu Mu looked down on peerless experts, it was just that peerless experts were realms above the eternal ancient realm. Although they were stronger than Chu Mu was confident that he could reach that realm in the near future. Peerless experts weren't qualified for him to look up to. This was a kind of arrogance that came from the bottom of his heart, from his bones. It was a kind of arrogance that had been accumulated since he stepped on the path of a sword master. Talent, strength, and everything else made Chu Mu far surpass his peers. In terms of battle techniques, he was comparable to absolute expert. In terms of cultivation techniques, the divine wilderness sword art was extremely profound. In terms of inheritance, he had the inheritance of the true god sword sex myriad sword forest and the inheritance of the sword universe. If he accepted an absolute expert as his master, other than giving him more cultivation resources, would he be able to give Chu Mu a better inheritance? Obviously, it would be very difficult. Moreover, accepting a master was not a small matter. Once one accepted a master, their fates would be intertwined. Therefore, experts would be more cautious when accepting a disciple. They would not easily accept a disciple. Once they accepted a disciple, their fates would be intertwined. King Xuanmiao had not accepted a disciple not because he did not want to, but because there was no suitable one. The requirements of his lineage were rather special. Now, Chu Mu met his requirements, which was why he wanted to accept Chu Mu as his disciple. Unfortunately, Chu Mu did not wait for King Xuanmiao to finish speaking before expressing his attitude. This was to prevent King Xuanmiao from losing face if he refused. Chu Mu was not willing to offend an absolute expert for no reason. Hearing Chu Mu's words, King Xuanmiao did not say anything else. He was an absolute expert, one of the 7 kings. He had his own dignity and pride. After giving Chu Mu a deep look, King Xuanmiao's feet did not move, but his figure shifted back and became blurry. It was as if he had entered the void, into the crack between time and space, gradually disappearing. Chu Mu stared at this method, but he could not see any mysteries behind it. The 7 kings all had complete inheritances, and they were all extraordinary inheritances. These inheritances all had their own mysteries. This was the first time Chu Mu had seen King Xuanmiao, so he did not understand much. Naturally, he did not understand the mysteries behind it. In fact, King Xuanmiao's mysterious Tao involved the changes of time and space, but it was not directly related to time and space. It was a very mysterious cultivation Tao. King Xuanmiao's appearance and departure left Lin Biruo dumbfounded. Her mind was frozen, and she could not think at all. King Xuanmiao. She actually saw King Xuanmiao, one of the 7 kings. He was also the most low-key and mysterious of the 7 kings. King Xuanmiao's words seemed to mean that he still wanted to take her young master as a disciple, but her young master actually refused. Why did he refuse? Lin Biruo only felt her mind in chaos. It was as if she could not think of anything, but also as if all kinds of thoughts were constantly emerging. After a long time, Lin Biruo gradually came back to her senses. Young master. She opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but she did not know what to say. Don't think too much. Cultivate the 8 ripple arts. Chu Mu instructed, then turned and left. He planned to meditate for a while. Cultivation could generally be divided into 2 types, active and passive. After meditating for a while, he would reflect on his sword duel with King Xuanmiao. Chu Mu felt that if he could comprehend even a little bit of that mysterious feeling, his sword skills would definitely improve significantly. King Xuanmiao appeared in the manor, had a sword duel with Chu Mu, and wanted to take him in as a disciple, but was rejected by Chu Mu. Aside from Chu Mu, Lin Biruo, and King Xuanmiao himself, no one else knew about this. King Xuanmiao would not speak of this matter. Chu Mu would not speak of it, and Lin Biruo would not speak of it either. Otherwise, once the news came out, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. Time passed. Aside from comprehending and cultivating, Chu Mu would also take some time to teach Lin Biruo sword skills and the 8 ripple art. As for the Waning Moon Sword Saint and the Monolithic Sword Saint, Chu Mu would only give them some pointers once in a while. A year later, Lin Biruo had reached the entry level of the 8 ripple arts and was able to display a trace of the sword skill's power. There were still a little more than 3 years before the opening of the Black God's secret realm. It was not a long time, so he could only do his best to increase his strength. Chu Mu's cultivation had also reached the peak of the 6th celestial layer, but he was still unable to comprehend the mysterious essence of King Xuanmiao's sword skills. However, he did not make it his main cultivation. After all, it was King Xuanmiao's inheritance, and he did not receive it. It would be very difficult for him to comprehend it through a single duel. As such, Chu Mu still focused on the sword universe and his own sword skills. There are still 3 years left. I have to do my best to reach the 7th celestial layer, Chu Mu thought to himself. The 7th celestial layer was a high-level Saint Realm expert. It was different from the 6th celestial layer. Once he reached the 7th celestial layer, Chu Mu estimated that his strength would increase significantly. At that time, it would not be impossible for him to rival or even kill an ordinary 9-star Saint Realm expert. A year later, Chu Mu continued to accumulate sword energy. However, according to his calculations, it would be difficult for him to reach the 7th celestial layer when the Black God's secret realm opened. Therefore, he went to the battle hall again and entered the silver cultivation room to try to reach the 7th celestial layer. Chapter 1789. This time, you guys stay here. Chu Mu said to the 3, Biruo, practice your sword arts well. Yes, young master. Lin Biruo, the Waning Moon Sword Saint, and the Rock Sword Saint replied respectfully. After that, Chu Mu strode out of the manor and headed out of the Bloodbath City. He took out his flying shuttle, started it, and left quickly. The 10-year time limit was almost up, and he was going to the Dark God Great Sword to wait for the secret realm to open. It was a once-in-a-thousand-years opportunity, and he couldn't miss it. There was only one spot, and he was going to enter. As for Lin Biruo and the others, since they couldn't enter, they might as well stay in the Bloodbath City. At least it would be safer there. The bright yellow flying shuttle left quickly. Other than Chu Mu, there were also many people heading towards the Dark God Great Sword. The flying shuttles of the 5 Castellan manors, as well as those of the major sections. The 100-meter-long flying shuttles were all set out, and they were all heading towards the same destination. The 10-year time limit, the Dark God's secret realm. The land of exile was shaken. those who had a spot set out, and those who didn't. Their goal was to see if there was a chance to enter the secret realm. No one was willing to miss such an opportunity. Big Brother, Third Brother sent news that an ordinary flying shuttle is approaching. It will pass by here in about an hour. A skinny man said. Good, tell the brothers to get ready. One-eyed Dragon laughed. Immediately, more than 10 people started to set up traps and stood in position, ready to form a battle formation at any time. This group of people were naturally the bandits of the land of exile. Actually, they couldn't be considered as bandits. They were just taking advantage of this opportunity to act as bandits and kill some people to seize some treasures and wealth that would be helpful to their future cultivation. The opening of the Dark God's secret realm was a big event, and those who couldn't enter also wanted to take a look. Naturally, some of the free sword cultivators had other ideas. There were more than a dozen people in the One-Eyed Dragon's group. Normally, they would form small groups and travel around adventuring and training. They were all ruthless people who walked the line between life and death. Of course, if the opponent was too powerful, they would not dare to make a move. They would have to observe first before making a decision. Those who owned flying shuttles were usually different, but there were also differences. An ordinary small flying shuttle was estimated to be at the level of a 9-star saint. However, the battle formation set up by the dozen of them was extremely powerful. Even a 9-star saint who was at the upper level would not be able to escape. It was enough to fight against an ordinary 9-star saint who was at the pinnacle. In many cases, this kind of strength was enough to run amok in the land of exile. It was also what they relied on. Half an hour later, a bright yellow shuttle flew over at an extremely fast speed. While driving the shuttle, Chu Mu was also multitasking his comprehension. Suddenly, with a boom, the flying shuttle trembled as if it had been hit by something. The tyrannical force actually caused the flying shuttle to sway. Even if it was an ordinary small flying shuttle, its surface was coated with a layer of melted silverstone liquid, which greatly increased its hardness and defensive power. Therefore, although this kind of attack caused the flying shuttle to sway, it was not able to break the defense of the flying shuttle. Of course, the purpose of the One-Eyed Dragon's group was not to destroy the flying shuttle. It should be known that any flying shuttle had extraordinary value. If it was slightly damaged, it would cost a lot of money to repair it. Their purpose was naturally to stop the flying shuttle and force out the people inside. Sure enough, under the trap they had set up, the flying shuttle gradually came to a stop. The flying shuttle was bound by a seemingly invisible force. Chu Mu scanned with his spiritual power and immediately felt it. He opened the door of the flying shuttle and came out. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. With a series of sounds, figures appeared around him. There were more than 10 people in total, and each of them stood in a position that looked very casual. However, Chu Mu could see that there was something special about it at a glance. Battle formation. Chu Mu's comprehension was extremely high. Apart from sword Dao, he also had a certain level of attainment in various aspects such as sword forging, pill refining, sealing, formations, and so on. Thus, he could tell at a glance where these people were standing. It was a battle formation. However, Chu Mu's attainment in battle formations had not reached the level where he could see through them at a glance. However, he could vaguely see that this was not a profound battle formation. Boy, it's your misfortune to have met us. However, you're also very lucky. As long as you obediently hand over your spatial ring and leave the flying shuttle behind, you can live. The One-Eyed Dragon stared at Chu Mu with his only eye and laughed. If you back off now, you can live. Chu Mu said indifferently. He was in a hurry to get to the Dark God Giant sword, so he did not want to be entangled with them. If they backed off obediently, there would be no harm. If they did not, ha 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 ha, a mere early 7th sky of Wangu kid dares to speak so arrogantly. Interesting. I don't even have the heart to kill him. The other party's meaning was clear. Since that was the case, Chu Mu did not say anything else. There was no point in saying more. He drew his sword. Flames filled the air, and the blazing brilliance spiritual sword appeared. Spiritual sword. He actually has a spiritual sword. The one-eyed dragon and the other's expressions changed drastically. There was a flying shuttle and a spiritual sword. This 7-star martial saint must have a shocking background. In an instant, a trace of hesitation appeared. If they killed the other party and were investigated, they might not be able to keep their lives. In for a penny, in for a pound. Kill him. The one-eyed dragon was very decisive and said fiercely. As soon as he finished speaking, a fiery red sword light flashed in front of him. It seemed to come from the void and then from the void. There was no beginning and no end. It was just a line, but it circled around and covered all directions. The one-eyed dragon was shocked and hurriedly moved his feet. The place where they stood previously had already formed a battle formation. Therefore, with the power of the battle formation, they were not killed by Chu Mu's sword. Otherwise, with the strength of a middle 9th-star martial saint, the one-eyed dragon would not be able to dodge Chu Mu's sword. He also would not be able to block Chu Mu's sword. Now, he had dodged with the help of the battle formation. The one-eyed dragon immediately understood that he had kicked an iron plate. This person's strength was definitely not as simple as a 7-star martial saint. However, it was too late for regret. As soon as the battle formation moved, Chu Mu sensed it. He did not immediately draw his second sword. Instead, he moved his feet and shifted his body, quickly moving around and dodging to observe the mysteries of the battle formation. Not long after, Chu Mu saw the mysteries of the battle formation. I see. After muttering to himself, Chu Mu drew his sword again. Clouds emerged and spread out, covering all directions. Immediately, a beam of sword light condensed and pierced out silently. The battle formation, which had been running smoothly, suddenly stopped under Chu Mu's sword. It began to fall apart like a machine that had lost its parts. The sword light turned like falling stars. Beams of sharp and domineering, peerlessly swift and fierce, covered all directions. Stop! The one-eyed dragon was horrified. He was finally sure that he and others had really kicked an iron plate. He hurriedly shouted. However, Chu Mu did not seem to hear him. Under the falling star's sword style, more than a dozen people were pierced through. Their consciousness was destroyed, and their primordial spirits were collected one by one. There were more than a dozen primordial spirits in total, and all of them had reached the 4th level. He quickly collected everyone's space rings. The sword light turned and cut off the invisible energy entangling the shuttle. It entered the shuttle and started again, leaving behind a trail of dust. It was a classic case of failing to kill and being killed. If the one-eyed dragon and the others knew that the person they were trying to kill was the unparalleled sword star Chu Mu, they would definitely regret it. Because with their strength and the cooperation of the battle formation, they could fight against an ordinary 7-star martial saint at the peak. In most cases, their lives would not be in danger. About an hour later, a figure approached. Seeing the corpses on the ground, he let out a shrill cry. Outside the black god giant sword, many shuttles stopped, and figures walked out from the shuttles. Among them, the most representative shuttles were the shuttles of the 5 Castellan mansions. The shuttles of the Slaughter Blood Manor were dark red in color. They looked ferocious and overbearing, like ferocious beasts that chose people to devour. The shuttles of the Black Demon Manor were black in color, as if they could absorb the surrounding light, like devils in the darkness. The shuttles of the Dragon-Slaying Manor were shaped like dragons, overbearing and fierce. The shuttles of the Green Fiend Manor were covered in green light, like dreamy illusions. The shuttles of the Silver Manor were silver-white, like sharp swords that could pierce through everything. Tu Qianjun, Heiju, Long Shi, Yanqingya, Bai Chun, and the others came down from the shuttles one by one. Their auras were obscure and unfathomable. Soon after, a 10-meter-long golden flying shuttle with an incomparably smooth appearance arrived and stopped. It was only 10 meters long, but its color and appearance were exquisite. It was comparable to the flying shuttles of the 5 great city lords' mansions. The door of this exquisite golden shuttle opened, and a figure walked out. He was wearing a long golden robe. Sword star of flowing light, sword stars, wind and sand swirled about. As soon as he appeared, his gaze swept past them, landing on the faces of Tu Qianjun and the others. The 6 great stars had gathered. Apart from the 5 castellan mansions and the 6 great stars, the powerful sects that were second only to the castellan mansions, such as the 3 sacred sects, Evil Dragon Palace, Black Gate, True Devil Palace, Holy Sword Sect, and the others, had also arrived. Figures walked out from the shuttles, each of them emitting a powerful aura. The shuttles of the slightly weaker forces had also arrived. Those who were qualified to enter the Black God's secret realm were basically geniuses. Moreover, they were the outstanding ones among the geniuses. To all the forces, geniuses were worth nurturing. If they were just ordinary cultivators, no matter how many resources and opportunities they were given, their usefulness would be limited. However, if the same resources and opportunities were used on geniuses, the benefits would be greater. Where's Chu Mu? He should be on his way. The 6 great stars had all appeared, but the strongest geniuses of the younger generation were not from the 6 great stars, but the 7 great stars. Chapter 1790. The blood-slaughtering guards in dark red armor, the silver guards in silver-white armor, the black demon guards in pure black armor, the blue demon guards in green armor, and the dragon-slaying guards in black armor. The guards of the 5 city lord mansions appeared one after another, and they were scattered in 5 different directions. Every member was at least a 7-star saint, and they were led by an 8-star saint. There were also 9-star saints. The purpose of the 5 city lord guards was naturally to maintain order. Once the Black God Mystery Realm opened, there might be some people who wanted to take advantage of the chaos and enter. Therefore, they had to be prepared. The 6-star saints each stood in a direction, and their auras suppressed the others. Following that, the geniuses of the first array also appeared. The geniuses of the first array were all nurtured by the major forces, and they were all very talented and powerful. Haha, Brother Lin, I haven't seen you for more than 10 years, and your aura has become even stronger. As soon as this person spoke, his voice rumbled like thunder, and it contained a shocking aura. More than 10 years have passed, but Brother Yen doesn't seem to have made any progress. The person called Brother Lin smiled faintly, and as if flicking away dust, he waved his sleeve and instantly defeated the other party's aura. A hint of fear flashed in the eyes of the Yen expert. He smiled embarrassedly and didn't speak again. This Lin was the 2nd palace master of the Evil Dragon Palace, and he was a dark star saint. Beside him was a youth, and it was his only son, Lin Ziki. Lin Ziki's eyes swept across the crowd, as if he was looking for something. Another flying shuttle arrived, and 10 figures walked down from it. The person in the lead was a youth, and he attracted a lot of attention as soon as he appeared. Aurora Sword Sovereign Zhao Wuji. Ever since he was defeated by Unparalleled Sword Star a few years ago, he disappeared without a trace. I don't know where he went. Seeing that his cultivation is even stronger than before, it seems like he went into seclusion to cultivate. As soon as Zhao Wuji appeared, his gaze swept across the crowd. He first glanced at Zhou Jianming and the other geniuses of the first array, and then at the 6-star saints, but he didn't find Chu Mu. Ha 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 ha, I, Fan Wenjie, will definitely be able to raise my strength to the limit in the Black God Mystery Realm. A laugh rang out. At first, it sounded distant, but when the last word was spoken, it sounded like it was right next to everyone's ears. Then, a figure with a strange color appeared. Sword Monarch of 100 Transformations, Fan Wenjie. Here comes another hidden genius who is not inferior to the top 3 geniuses in the first array. The so-called hidden genius was just a title. However, there were also some low-profile geniuses who would suddenly appear and display shocking talent. These people were known as hidden geniuses. For example, Zhao Wuji was a hidden genius. Fan Wenjie, who had appeared now, was a genius who appeared after Zhao Wuji. Because the sword techniques he cultivated were ever-changing and could be said to be extremely changeable, he was called the Sword Monarch of 100 Transformations. Fan Wenjie, let's see who can improve the most in the Black Mystic realm. Another voice rang out. Like a sudden clap of thunder, a figure shot out along the ground. Feng Wu-yi, let's fight. Fan Wenjie smiled mischievously, and didn't show any weakness. Sword Monarch Feng Wu-yi, the third hidden genius. It seems like the hidden geniuses can't sit still after the opening of the Black God Mystic Realm. The Black God Mystic Realm was a once-in-a-millennium opportunity. If the hidden geniuses didn't come out and fight for this opportunity, they would be fools. More and more experts arrived. Dark Star Sword Saints, and even Bright Moon Sword Saints appeared. However, the highest-ranked Bright Yang Sword Saints were nowhere to be seen. No one knew if they even existed. As for the Seven Kings, although such a grand event was huge, it wasn't enough for them to make a move. Of course, other than themselves, no one else knew that they had already arrived and were hiding in the void to watch. At this time, a bright yellow flying shuttle rapidly approached and stopped. The door opened and a figure walked out. It's Chu Mu. The seventh star, unparalleled sword star Chu Mu is here. As soon as the exclamations rang out, gazes immediately shifted over. Those gazes were intense, like sharp sword light, piercing through the void and landing on Chu Mu's face. In an instant, Chu Mu felt that the gazes were like swords, piercing through him. However, his expression didn't change, as if he didn't feel the pressure from those gazes. Bai Chen's indifferent expression changed, and a trace of a smile flashed across his face. Zhao Wuji took a few steps forward, cupping his hands at Chu Mu. Brother Chu, I thought you wouldn't come. How can I miss this once-in-a-millennium opportunity? Chu Mu smiled. You're the so-called seventh star, Chu Mu? A voice interrupted. Feng Wui's eyes seemed to contain traces of lightning. He leaped up, turning into a bolt of lightning, shooting towards Chu Mu. Let me see if your unparalleled sword star is worthy of its name. Feng Wui's sword art was called Thunder Hibernation. The so-called Thunder Hibernation was like a clap of thunder, shocking the world with a single brilliant feat. If Feng Wui didn't draw his sword, he wouldn't be a threat. The moment he drew his sword, all his energy would converge into one, instantly releasing an incomparably terrifying might. Feng Wui instantly drew his sword, and a bolt of lightning flowed around the sword, heading straight for the tip of the sword. It turned into a bolt of lightning, sharp, violent, and extremely tyrannical. This sword move was straightforward, without any variations. It was just a simple sword thrust, and Feng Wui's body merged with his sword. The speed was extremely fast, and it was incomparably shocking. Feng Wui fully displayed his cultivation as an 8-star martial sage, ferocious and tyrannical. Feng Wui was originally several hundred meters away from Chu Mu. However, in the blink of an eye, he merged with his sword, turning into a bolt of Thunder Hibernation sword light. He instantly tore through the sky and appeared before Chu Mu. Chu Mu's eyes reflected the Thunder Hibernation sword light. He could clearly feel a tyrannical aura charging over. A shocking aura locked onto him. Chu Mu was very clear that the instant Feng Wui's sword struck him, all the terrifying energy contained within would be released instantly, destroying the target. This Feng Wui seemed to be probing, but he was actually merciless. Idiot! Zhao Wuji said inwardly. Bai Chen and the others were not worried. If Chu Mu couldn't even block one of Feng Wui's sword moves, then he really didn't have the qualifications to be on the same level as them. Chu Mu's figure did not move. A sword light bloomed in his hand, and he instantly slashed out. Feng Wui's swordsmanship was indeed profound, but compared to Bai Chen, there was still a gap, not to mention King Xuanmiao. Thus, the instant Feng Wui attacked, Chu Mu saw the profoundness of his opponent's swordsmanship. He also saw the flaws in his opponent's swordsmanship. Chu Mu's sword followed the flaws in his opponent's swordsmanship and instantly broke it. The sword light, which was like a hidden thunderbolt, did not even have time to release its shocking power before it was broken by Chu Mu. A cold light was released in front of his eyes, causing Feng Wui's pupils to tremble. With a surge of energy, he quickly waved the sword in his hand, condensing a lightning sword wall in front of him to block Chu Mu's sword. Feng Wui's cultivation was at the early stage of the 8-star Saint Realm, but his strength was strong enough to match the peak of the 9-star Saint Realm. Thus, it was not easy to deal with him with one sword move. The lightning sword wall shattered under Chu Mu's sword. Feng Wui took advantage of this opportunity to fly back. He felt the sword in his hand tremble incessantly. A wave of energy constantly attacked it, forcing him to use more strength to hold it tightly. Chu Mu took a step forward, raised his sword, and slashed down. In an instant, the fiery red sword light seemed to fall from the sky, locking onto Feng Wui and slashing down. If Feng Wui had only been testing Chu Mu before, Chu Mu would not have cared. The problem was that Feng Wui had attacked without mercy. Since that was the case, Chu Mu would not show mercy either. Stop! Feng Wui's expression changed greatly. He felt that this sword would be difficult for him to block. If he could not block it, it was very likely that he would be killed on the spot. In an instant, Feng Wui was in a hopeless situation. An incomparably powerful sword light tore through the sky, slashing from the side. It collided with the fiery red sword Qi, and with a bang, both dissipated. Someone attacked and destroyed Chu Mu's sword Qi, saving Feng Wui. Many thanks, Senior. Once Feng Wui was safe, he immediately retreated. He looked at the person who had attacked and cupped his hands. It was nothing. The person who had attacked smiled faintly. It was the Evil Dragon Palace's second palace master, Lin Zhentong. The reason why he had attacked was very simple. His only son, Lin Ziki, had told him that Chu Mu was Chu Mu after he had appeared. Lin Ziki and Chu Mu had some conflict. Lin Zhentong already knew about this. If it was before, he would not have cared. However, Chu Mu was the unparalleled sword star of the 7th star. He had no choice but to pay attention to him. If it had been someone else, they might have tried to ease the conflict and resolve it in the end. However, Lin Zhentong's thoughts were different. He wanted to kill Chu Mu. That way there would be no conflict. Chu Mu glanced over. Lin Zhentong also glanced over. His gaze was incomparably sharp, carrying a shocking killing intent. In the next breath, Lin Zhentong was about to attack. Bai Chen and the others narrowed their eyes. Lin Zhentong was a veteran Dark Star Sword Saint expert. His strength was more than 10 times more terrifying than an ordinary Peak 9-star Saint expert. Could Chu Mu resist him? Suddenly, there was a rumble and the earth shook. Everyone's attention was attracted. It turned out that the Black Deity huge sword was shaking. Under the shaking, a wave of ripples instantly spread out from the Black Deity huge sword, sweeping in all directions. It swept past everyone's bodies, making them feel an incomparably tyrannical aura. No one could resist it. Shortly after, a terrifying sharpness soared from the Black Deity huge sword, stirring up the wind and clouds. The sky suddenly turned dark, and it was as if night had descended. Numerous extremely terrifying spatial rifts appeared frequently, and they crisscrossed and covered the sky. Every single spatial rift was pitch black, and it was like the mouth of a primeval ferocious beast that intended to devour the heavens and the earth and annihilate all life. The sharpness of the divine sword and spatial cracks. Such power caused everyone's expression to change greatly. They were incomparably shocked.